المداد يا الله اسقينا بالمداد يا الله.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وسندنا وقدوتنا وأسوتنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to everybody tuning in live to the Karima YouTube channel and to the Karima Facebook Live. And welcome back to another edition of the Karima live stream on this last blessed night of the month of Rabiul Awwal. Well, I was just talking to Imam Dawood and we were saying like many countries and places all over the world are now in one final Mawlid to say goodbye to the month of the birth of the Prophet ﷺ, and here we are to reflect on the election of potentially Joe Biden to the presidency of the United States, which I guess in its own way is tonight's discussion will be a commemoration of the legacy of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam in how it relates to the modern world and the modern context that we all inhabit and the realities that we all have to face. And alhamdulillah, we're joined by two very special guests. I'll just give quick introductions to both of them. Imam Dawood is somebody that we've had a few times already. I would like to say that he's a friend of the Karima Foundation. We've had him on for the Mawlid and other such events. And he is the executive director of the Michigan branch of CARE. Michigan, I think, was one of the very key states in the recent election that took place. So that will be an interesting discussion to bring up, inshallah ta'ala. And he's also a traditional scholar and who's written a lot on the history of Black Muslims. And we're also joined by Ustad Mobeen Vaid, who is a student of knowledge, a political commentator, philosophical commentator on a lot of the things that are going on in the world at the moment in terms of modern philosophies and modern liberal trends. I always like to think that Ustad Mobeen's Facebook is an evidence for why Facebook should be permissible, because I think he uses it in a way that is very beneficial and conducive to the Muslim community. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. While we're going to go through this discussion, inshallah, please do share the link with people so people know that this is happening and they can come and tune in, inshallah ta'ala. And just to really kick off, I think a good place to start was in the aftermath of the election. There was a social media post that you made, it was Imam Dawood Walid, that did the rounds in a lot of places. I saw it on a lot of statuses and things, and it was in reference to the Muslims when they come back from the Battle of Badr. They hear news that the Romans have defeated the Persians, and this is there was a long war between the Romans and the Persians, and finally the Romans have finally defeated the Persians, and the sense that the Muslims have is a sense of jubilation, because the Christians, the Christian Romans, are seen as their sort of brothers in an Abrahamic faith tradition, a monotheistic faith tradition, and there's a great sense of happiness that happens, and verses of the Quran are revealed of Surah Ar-Rum, the opening verses of Surah Ar-Rum. And you posted, and I'm going to paraphrase because I don't have it in front of me right now, something to the effect that our sense in tonight's election result could potentially be like the Muslims when they heard of the victory of the Romans, knowing that the Romans would be their next opponents. And I'd love to get some reflections on that thought specifically, and just ideas on what you think about the results of the election.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا وأسواتنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا دائما أبدا وبعد. First of all, it's really a pleasure to be on here with you both in this discussion in this last day of Rabiul Awwal, and may Allah Azza wa Jal make this conversation conform with the creed and the spiritual disposition of our beloved Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu salam. And may Allah Azza wa Jal have us all see truth as truth and follow it. And may He have us see falsehood as falsehood and to stay far, far away from it. Ameen. So yeah, that was really something that you made reference to that I posted right after the election results, as far as Qaisar and Kisra and the issue of the Romans facing off against the Persians, and the Romans won. And this was something that the Sahaba saw as something that was welcomed. And not too much longer after that, then we have the issue of where the Sahaba themselves are faced off in a battlefield against Qamul Rum, or the Romans. And I say that to say that there are a number of challenges that Muslims have faced in America in the domestic context, as well as the international context, as it refers specifically to the Trump administration. And perhaps we can go down some of those specifically in relationship to the increasing of drone bombings and killings under Trump in comparison to Obama, in which Obama outpaced Bush that came before. Some of the problematic relationships that he's had, Trump and particularly with the UAE and government and the Saudi government in comparison to his predecessor. But then we have the issue of so if we want to posit it like that, we can say that Trump and the Trumpers, the MAGAs, maybe we look at them as somewhat of and obviously it's not a clean analogy, but we can compare them to the Persians. Well, Biden and Harris and the liberal political establishment in many ways is like Romans. And I believe that we Muslims, actually, I was surprised. I saw some Muslims actually treating the election results like an Eid almost, like we did it, Allahu Akbar, it's. I was waiting for a special Khatam Quran, like how some Muslims did for Bernie. Like people were making Khatam Quran for Bernie to not only for Shifa, but for Bernie to win. Allah knows best. I even heard in one place that people were making dua qunut for Bernie. SubhanAllah. So it's really a bizarre time that we live in, and it seems that the year 2020 in America in general, but amongst American Muslims, is a lot of people have blurry vision in the year 2020, and I guess that's the best way that I can put it for starters.
I mean, that comparison, and maybe I'll throw this question back over to Ustad Mubin. He had some technical difficulties. So we were just speaking about just initial reflections on the election in the aftermath and thoughts. But if Biden, and Kamala Harris are, because a lot of people would say, well, if you're going to talk about the Romans and the idea of Christians and faith tradition and an alliance that is there, they'll say, well, that should be Donald Trump because he is the quote unquote Christian candidate. He was there. I mean, I know Biden's been really pushing forward his Catholicism recently, but Trump, he held the Bible, and that shows that he's a very devout Christian. And Paula White was having some sort of epileptic fit for him. I don't know if you guys saw that the Christian ceremony that they had to guarantee Trump victory. So is Biden really the sort of the Roman candidate here, or is it really the other way around, that Trump should be seen as the sort of the Christian candidate?
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. I'll start by reinforcing what Imam Dawood said in terms of my own just being very honored to be in both of your company. Inshallah, this will be a time of benefit for all of us and a beneficial conversation. As to your question, I mean, I don't know that there is a religious candidate here. I think individually speaking, it's probably the case that Joe Biden's a more religious person than Donald Trump. Donald Trump is perhaps, certainly in recent memory, the least religious president we've had in a long time, in a very long time. And posing with the Bible doesn't change that. There are many instances that stand out to me that demonstrated just his complete indifference to religion from the 2016 campaign. But one, and it wasn't sort of the inability to quote the Bible. To me, what stood out was how he responded to a question about how often he asks God for forgiveness. And his response to that question was very much on brand with Trump, which was, I don't think I can ask God for forgiveness, right? And this is in front of a evangelical Christian audience, where he is openly confessing to the idea that he doesn't seek forgiveness out, not even from God. And when we talk about someone who is driven by his own ego and just the sort of pathological narcissism that he has in himself, I think that was extremely, extremely telling, and perhaps the most instructive anecdote that demonstrated that to me. And so I don't know that I think, at least publicly, Joe Biden appears to have some sense of humility or willing to express himself in ways that appear humble. Whether it is sincere or insincere, right? I don't know, but I think he at least seems capable of expressing contrition, right? Of expressing a concern and care for more than himself. And so, at least on those grounds, one would say that what we see ala zahir, right, just sort of publicly, there are certain things that are redeemable about Joe Biden's person when pitted against Donald Trump. Having said that, I think when you get into the question of policy, you're dealing with something that is very messy across both. I don't think you have a clearly religious candidate on either side. You have candidates who have policies that are congenial to the interests of people who care about faith and have deep moral convictions, and the extent to which those are distributed, on various issues are uneven and asymmetrical. I think in some issues Trump is better. On a great many issues, he's quite worse. I think the most damning thing about Trump, to me, is that he radicalizes his opponents. And so in some ways, he is a liability for many of the issues that people of faith care about. He does more to inflame hostility to faith-based positions than any conservative or evangelical could do, or any religious person could do of their own accord. He makes everyday liberals hate things like religious freedom. He makes people who become violently opposed to things like religious exceptions for things like LGBT, right? And so religious positions become, they become more marginalized as a function of his persona and the way he pursues his politics, right? He's not a bulwark against his opponents. He, in some ways, gives them more heft. And so I think in that respect, a transition is perhaps potentially good, although Allah knows many of these things now are bipartisan. We don't have a liberal conservative difference on a lot of social issues anymore. And I think one of the interesting things about the election result, and perhaps this is something we can get into as well, is just how little it seems that many of us understand the society we live in. The outcome, in some ways, to me, is very peculiar because Trump won a greater share of the minority vote. He won a majority of the Native American vote, at least in initial exit polling. So over 50% of Native Americans voted for Trump. He doubled his support amongst Black Americans, which has been a solidly blue bloc for a long time. And at least from initial exit polling, it seems that the vast majority of that shift is on account of young Black voters. Trump won the vote of people who decided late who they wanted to vote for, which traditionally, the late decision goes to the challenger, not to the incumbent, right? He also did much better amongst Muslims, right? I mean, early exit polling said 35%, which if that's anywhere close to true, you're looking at a potential tripling of Muslim support since 2016. Much more support amongst Hispanics and Latinos. Even gay and lesbian people doubled their support for Trump. And so there are a lot of questions that I think this election raises that people need to consider, right? And certainly it challenges a number of public narratives that we have taken for granted for a long time. So yeah, those are just some initial thoughts.
Imam Dawood, I saw recently that you're part of Imam Zaid's MANA, I think is the Muslim Alliance of North America, which is a sort of very Black American Muslim movement led by our teacher Imam Zaid Shakir, may Allah protect him. And I guess that we could come off on a question there about the Black the black vote, really, because one of the things I read about was this idea that traditionally there was always a 20-80% split within the black community of Democrat versus Republican, and this all comes from the civil rights movement. And slowly over time, what's happened is, as the next generation of, I don't know, is it Z, X, millennial, I'm millennial, I guess, whatever generation comes after me, slowly that 80-20 sort of fixed binary theological divide on in terms of picking your political party is becoming eroded, and just that slight increase from 20% to whatever it is becoming has caused Trump to increase the black vote and has been very beneficial for him. One of the things about Trump that's constantly pointed out is the fact that he's sort of very, I don't know how to put it, but it's like he's very he's very problematic when it comes to race. And that's always been pointed out. And his reaction to the Black Lives Matter movement, George Floyd, how he sort of came out in support of right-wing militias, just Proud Boys, a lot of craziness that's happened in terms of that. But then why is the Black American, and how is he seen? So firstly, how is he seen amongst the Black Muslim American community? And then generally, why is he picking up support in the Black American community?
Well, I think there's three groups if you're talking about the Muslim community in America who are Black, and I want to be very specific of African American Muslims. So excuse me for those who are listening, but I'm not talking about Somalis. I'm not talking about Sudanese or Senegalese when I make this comment. This is specifically speaking about the descendants of the enslaved Africans here in the United States of America. There's three groups. The largest group of those people who are Muslim vote just like there are our brethren who are African American who aren't Muslim, that just basically say that voting for Republicans, including Trump, is just untenable because of the overt racism, right, from the Republican Party and the establishment, which the old signal language, or what's called the Southern strategy, really started to erode when President Obama first got elected, and then the whole Tea Party movement, and then the MAGAs, Make America Great Again, and all of this, right? So for that segment of American Muslims who are African American, it just simply is not an option to vote for Trump based upon those grounds. You have another group of people who simply will not vote at all because they say that the Republican establishment and the liberal Democratic establishment both are racist. And to draw on what Malcolm X said, rahmatullahi alayhi, that the Republicans are the wolf and the Democrats are the fox. But if you have a chicken coop, both of them will eat your chickens. It's actually easier to protect yourself from a Republican wolf than from a sly liberal fox. And then also that basically they say that they'll say that we need to do something for ourselves and stick to doing dawah, because politics on a national level in particular does nothing for us because based on special interests. So that's another group of people who I'd say is the second largest group. Muslims who are African American who simply don't believe in voting at all in national political races. Some of them may vote locally. Then you have a third group amongst us, and I know some African American people who are Muslims who voted for Trump, and they say, look, we don't care whether Trump likes us or not, right? But they said they want something tangible, number one, for the Black community. And the Democrats never do anything tangible for the Black community. And they said, well, they'll make the argument, well, at least Trump signed in the legislation long-term funding for historical Black colleges and universities, and that Trump is the one who signed in the criminal justice reform bill, that Trump signed in legislation for increased loans and empowerment zones, which has increased certain small business loans for African American businesses, even though a lot of this money has gone towards gentrification and non-Black people establishing businesses in predominantly Black neighborhoods. But these are the arguments they make. And then also they'll say, look, when it comes to preserving our religious freedom of how to practice Islam, that even though Trump himself is a fasiq, but his positions and the judges that he appoints is more likely to preserve our freedom of conscience and religious practice than a Biden-Harris administration, who, I mean, for instance, just named to their transition team. This is something unprecedented, but they add to their transition team someone who identifies as trans, for instance, right? So there's a very strong push of pushing LGBTQ plus agenda into the public space, coming from the left, to the point, and I'll end this point, to the point, and this really startled a lot of people, and it startled me actually too, but it startled some people that I spoke with that said that they simply can't vote for Democrats at this point. There was a debate amongst the Democratic candidates about a year ago, and it was sponsored by Human Rights Coalition, which is a LGBTQ organization. They were the main sponsor of it, and it was on national TV here in the States, I think MSNBC. So there was a question that was posed by one of the candidates at the time, who was a former congressman in Texas by the name of Beto O'Rourke. And the question was posed that if churches, and by extrapolation, all religious institutions, he said, if churches won't perform same-sex marriage, do you agree that their nonprofit status as a non-governmental organization that's tax-exempt religious organization should be pulled? Beto O'Rourke said yes, and he got a standing ovation. And there were other people who were on the stage who actually agreed with this position. This is where the so-called progressive movement is going in the United States of America, where it's like the people of Lut wanting to come and knock down Lut's door, alayhi salam, right? So this really worries a lot of Muslims who are Black in particular. They're like, look, people can do whatever they want to do, but don't try to impose this in our schools. Don't try to impose this in our masajid. Don't try to impose this in a and even in a public school where someone can say that they're a woman, but they're biologically a male, to go use a bathroom in a locker room with my daughter, right? So this really worries a lot of Muslims in general, but there's a percentage of Black Americans who are Muslim who simply said, and I've heard this, that in this particular context in America, Hizbuddin takes the priority over Hizbul Nefs, because the belief is our lives are not in imminent danger in America. Like Muslims are not in imminent danger of just being mass murdered like Muslims in Bosnia. There's not this sense that we're going to be around in the concentration camps, but Hizbuddin, the right for us to practice our religion and religious conscience, is actually, it's an issue that's doruri, that we have to stand up for. It's something that is mandatory. So these are the three different strains of thought that I've heard amongst Muslims who are African American.
I'd love to come back to that soon, inshallah, but just to bring Ustad Mubin in terms of one of the big debates, I think, is this idea, if you take it back to like first principles, just Muslims and political philosophies. So this idea of having the Muslim Democrat or the Muslim Republican, a lot of people will problematize that, because we believe as Muslims that Islam is something that encompasses everything. Like your whole identity is as a Muslim and nothing more, nothing less. And therefore to say you're a Muslim Democrat or a Muslim Republican is to then say basically that, okay, you know, and I feel, I don't know how we sort of navigate this, but for example, Malcolm X, rahimahullah wa ghafarallah lahu, may Allah forgive him for any faults he did have, but he does have, for example, the bullet and the ballot. He has a famous speech in which he says, and I paraphrase, but my religious philosophy is al-Islam, but my political philosophy is Black nationalism. And these are his own words that he's quoted as saying. And a lot of people will say that's actually, in a sense, secularizing your faith by saying Islam will cover this much of my identity, and the rest of my identity, to fill in the gaps, will be done by this. And a lot of people will have a problem with that. So just based off of that, as Muslims, and obviously what Imam Dawood mentioned about the maqasid, the hifdhuddin, we need to protect our religion. The religious identity that we have needs to be, and this is obviously number one in the maqasid of Sharia, as Imam Shatibi points out. So on that regard, as a Muslim, how should Muslims be approaching political elections? Can there be such a thing as a Muslim socialist, a Muslim, like in the UK we have Muslim socialists, especially with the left here. Can you have Muslim conservatives, Muslim Republicans, Muslim Democrats, or are you Democrat in certain issues, Republican in certain issues? And then is there a problem then with allying yourself full frontal into one of these movements?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. I'll say I think there was a difference in politics in this country in the 50s, right? And what we have going on today politically. We have a couple of challenges that we're facing in the modern or contemporary political environment. One of them is that we have seen the unraveling of many traditional institutions in the West. Of them is almost the complete collapse of the church, right? And so you have rising atheism, you have rising what they refer to as the nuns, people have no religious affiliation. And then you have people who do have a religious affiliation, meaning they sort of subscribe in an identitarian way to their faith, but they don't really believe in it a whole lot, right? So sort of what does their religion believe and what do they believe as a religious person? They believe in generic things like being honest and good people. They believe that all good people go to paradise. They don't have a really thick notion of creed and belief. They don't have a really ongoing place of worship and ritual and theological demand, right? So you have a reconfiguring of religion for people who are religious, and then you have a collapse of religion everywhere else. So you don't have a real traditional notion of religion that looms over society in any serious way. And in lieu of that, what you have is religion that is getting increasingly privatized, right? So religion is something that sort of sits in my home. It's something that the commitments of which I maintain in sort of the crevices of my heart. But in the public square, I participate as a secular actor who has commitments and convictions that are not grounded or anchored in my actual beliefs. And there's a bit of a rhetorical sleight of hand that ends up taking place. Because what happens is, and it's very obvious to anyone who sees it, is that people are participating as belief-based actors, right? So your modern liberal is committed to liberal social and political values. Your modern conservative is committed to conservatism, not merely as sort of a self-contained political project, but as a political project that to them addresses serious questions of how society should be organized and what is good for people. What is good for people as sort of instinctively and inextricably as human beings. It is answering those questions. And so you have a vacuum that's emerged through the loss of deep spiritual and traditional spiritual community. And what you have is a political enterprise that is increasingly acquiring religious meaning. And so the extent to which people come in and enter into that enterprise as Muslim Republicans or as Muslim Democrats, what's happening is they're instrumentalizing that notion of being Muslim in more of a cosmetic way, as something that does not impinge on their politics. In fact, it is subordinate to their politics. And what I believe as a religious person, well, that's irrelevant to what I believe for everyone else. And everyone, I mean, over time, it's very tough to even maintain this real distinction, right? The sort of collapse of the secular ruse is pretty obvious to everyone involved. And that's why invariably what happens over time to people who are liberals is that they subscribe to liberal reformed religion, and people who are conservatives that they subscribe to a religious dispensation that is reinterpreted and reconfigured to align to conservative norms. That's what happens. That's what happens everywhere. We've seen it left and right. And the extent to which Muslims continue to do this, they're going to reconfigure their theological convictions to coincide with their politics, not the other way around. Because their politics become theology. They become transcendental. They become, for them, a search for meaning and an answer to the big questions in life. And there's a lot of vacuousness to that type of politics because politics cannot do that for you as a person. It just can't do that. And when it continues to do that, you become hedonistic, you become anxious as an individual, right? And you subscribe to worldviews that to me are joyless. There is no joy in modern politics. It is a bleak world to be in. It is extremely demoralizing and depressing. And it is that because there is no notion of salvation. There is no answer to the higher questions of what happens to us when we die. What will we be resurrected? Right? And what is our purpose in this life above and beyond participating in the next culture war in an extremely virulent way, right? It is just a domain of vitriol, and that is wearing on people, and it is a spiritual crisis that we have, not only for Muslims but for Western society across the board.
So based off of that, and I just throw this back to Ustad Mubin, and then I want you to answer it as well, Ustad Sheikh Dawood. So then when Muslims do now come and navigate the modern political sphere in modern liberal secular countries, how should we play? What should be? I mean, and I guess that's a big question that we're going to have to uncover along the way as we carry on this conversation. But then, if you're saying that you shouldn't let your politics overcome your identity, so that your religion starts to become deformed in order to fit in the box that politics has made for it, then how should Muslims address issues that have come, and how should Muslims react to election season when it comes upon us?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the big question, right? I mean, can you participate in a intensely secularized social setting and political setting without becoming secularized yourself, right? Without sequestering your own faith, your own belief, your own scripture, and everything else to some place of entire irrelevance, where you become apathetic about what your religion actually has to say and indifferent to its morals, right? And to its instruction and guidance, right? This is supposed to be guiding your life. The words of Allah, the Sunnah of the Prophet, this is supposed to be guiding our lives. And when it is overwhelmed by competing convictions, what you are at severe risk as an individual, and vulnerable to various forms of heresy and apostasy. I mean, those are the two immediate risks that enter in for a person like that, whether they recognize that's taking place or not, right? Wittingly or unwittingly, that path is right there. And so if people want to, now the sort of secondary question is, okay, if people want to advance their own interests in a society, how do they do so? And is the only way to do so through active participation in national political elections. I would submit that national political elections, especially the election of the presidency, is perhaps one of the least meaningful ways for people to actually advance their own interests. If people want to change society for the better, Allah knows there are plenty of ways that they can do so. And there are avenues all around us to become moral actors and to help people next to us and be people who are doing amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar. And those are ways that are not in the media, right? Won't get you the same sort of publicity, right? Are not on the news every day, but can have a real world impact in connecting you to others, in carrying out your responsibility of Muslims to be doing da'wah and to be spreading khair, right? Isa alayhi salam, and the woman said, وَجَعَلَنِي مُبَارَكًا أَيْنَمَا كُنْتَ, that Allah made me mubarak, yani just in himself, just the barakah came from Isa alayhi salam wherever he was. And as Muslims, we should be people who are committed to trying to embody the barakah of our deen. That's my sort of general thing. Although, again, some of this, depending on the question, we'd have to get into some tafsir. But
Imam Dawood, I mean, you wrote a book on this, so I guess so we could really go into some detail here. But I guess similarly on that note is, what is the Muslim political identity? I mean, we know from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, especially in the Madani period, there is an Islamic polity and there is Islamic political thought, and the ulama have written on this for generations, famously Imam al-Ghazali, Ibn Taymiyyah, Imam Juwayni and others. So for example, now again navigating and sort of a very similar question to you that we gave to Ustad Mubin is this idea that how then do we navigate the modern political sphere and the two ideologies that are sort of competing with each other as Muslims, and is there an independent Muslim political thought that can be sort of nourished in that sphere?
Well, I do believe that there is an independent political narrative and thought or methodology that can be nourished here. But I think that there takes some spiritual prerequisites, right? The grounding in proper creed, and also the work to actualize noble traits of character so that we can stand on solid ethical ground that informs our political methodology, right? And that's probably part of the challenge that we have. And to take a step forward, and this is a new issue, and you mentioned some great scholars that wrote about a number of issues, and some of our scholars of old wrote about fiqh siyasi, or about the fiqh of politics. As Ustad Mubin pointed out, though, we are living in a peculiar era right now in the West of robust and expanding secularization. This is now called the postmodern era, in which all institutions and even frameworks of society, including the family, are being deconstructed. So there takes a level of intellectual vigor that we need people who are grounded in our tradition and also understand the social political frameworks that we live in, that we can write up a type of methodology for Muslim political engagement in the West, or Muslim political engagement in the United States of America. And there's some of us who are working on this particularly right now, quietly, but we just can't complain about what Muslims are doing, because there is an intellectual gap about giving people specifics. So what we have right now is that many Muslims who are involved in politics and political activism, most of them are unaware that really their isnad goes back to Karl Marx. They don't know it, but they've been given a language and a methodology. Because see, we all have an isnad whether we know it or not, right? And their isnad, much of it, they don't know it goes back to Marxism. And maybe they don't even realize it. And you can even hear it in their language, where they repeat the language of other people. My body, my choice. We have to reimagine a broad intersectional reality, and they have to like drop all of these buzzwords and terms, right? It's straight out of Marxist inspired thought. And then some people seeing this have then gone to another response in a I would call a knee-jerk response to this real problem. And both sides, when it's convenient, will sprinkle in a little ayatul Qur'aniyya, will sprinkle in a few ahadith. One of them may quote Jalaluddin Rumi when it's convenient, where they totally take him out of proper context, because we know that he was a man of madhab and a man of tariqah. And then you have others who will take Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, and then they'll sprinkle in their little thing on their far right view. But at the end of the day, until we develop, and I'm not saying there's going to be more than one, but until we can develop a methodology of how we look at issues and prioritize certain things here in America and the West in general, we're going to keep having these problems. And I think I said on the first Karima Foundation podcast that I was on, but actually I think I said this to Ustad Mubin as well. I miss the 90s. I really do. In the sense that when we used to have the traditional versus Salafi debates, or the Ikhwani versus the Sufi debates, at least we all were coming from the position that the Quran and the Sunnah are paramount. These take precedence. And we have an outlook that's based in nusus. Well, as Dr. Sherman Abdul Hakim Jackson said, Hafidhahullah, that now, amongst many Muslim circles, especially when talking about politics, mentioning the words as aqidah or fiqh or akhlaqiyat, that might get you attacked just for mentioning these three phrases, right, that are very central to our deen. So, but we have to produce something and to be able to articulate, to give people instructions, because right now it's just it's really a free-for-all in the United States of America from my position. And this goes, by the way, for all major Muslim organizations, either funded by the community or funded by outside foundations. There is no articulated methodology that says, based upon our Rasul, we prioritize this, this, and this. And then there's a language that can be presented for the Tulabul Ilm. And then there's also a more, there's tahdhib, or there's condensed language or simplified for the awam. This doesn't exist. This does not exist in the United States of America. So this is the jihad of our time. I believe it's developing this and to be able to disseminate this. And also and I said this in my last point, another point, this is the race of the tortoise, not of the hare. And another part of the problem of American Muslims is we want quick results, right? So we feel in debt to jump onto this bandwagon or that bandwagon because many of us feel that we're under siege and being driven from fear to jump on these different bandwagons. Well, we have to develop something in which we refine and change over time to get where we want to get if we're truly about the endeavors of Islam, Iman, and Ihsan. So for instance, the LGBTQ movement, they had like basically a 40+ year program to get them to where they're at right now. They didn't get where they're at in so much influence overnight. They had a program that they worked slow and methodically, and they began to push the gold line or the yardstick further and further and further. And we don't have that type of understanding here in America. That unfortunately the Christian Coalition had when they put forth a program in the late 70s, or the LGBTQ movement in the late 60s. So this is something that we really our ulama and our mufakkirin and people also who are involved in political circles, we have to come together and produce a real manhaj, if I can use that term, in regards to dealing with these issues. Otherwise, we're going to keep floundering.
I have a couple of questions on the back of that. And by the way, if any of you want to come in on each other, then please do just butt in, and we can just keep going. But I think there's a couple of questions here that either of you can take, really. But number one, I think, is the idea of America as this sort of central place in Muslim discourse. And a lot of people, I mean, we had our teacher, Dr. Yaqub Ahmed, who's a professor in Turkey, who came on, and we had the Hagia Sophia. I don't even remember when the Hagia Sophia got reverted back to a masjid, bihamdillahi ta'ala, and there was backlash. And was it ISNA or ICNA or one of these major American organizations?
It was the Secretary General of ISNA, Sayyid Saeed.
Okay, there we go. So he came out and said, oh, this is, Erdogan's done such and such, and this is against the spirit of Islam, and how dare he, and he doesn't know how he's hurt, I don't know, whatever he said. He had a statement. And I mentioned this to Dr. Yaqub, and he said, when you go to Turks and you say they don't care. It's like, America what? Like, why do American Muslims have this idea that they're so important? I mean, there's no disrespect to either of you, but it's just this idea that sometimes there's an elevation of the American discourse, and it's part of maybe like the American hegemony, that America sort of runs the world, and therefore American Muslims should have. So I think maybe Ustad Mubin or Imam Dawood, if you want to come in on this, why should Muslims care about the American election, and why is the American philosophical and political discourse, especially in regards to how Muslims are relating to it, why should people care? And is it just an Anglospheric thing, or should Muslims around the world actually be keeping a very close eye on American elections and how Muslims specifically react within them?
Yeah, I mean, I'll offer a few thoughts. I think if you're in the rest of the world, you perhaps care because you care about the American empire and how it's going to impact your country, right? And so the American empire is a global empire, and it routinely expands and extends its tentacles into the domestic affairs of other countries. And it has not shown a lot of hesitation or prudence in exercising its military arm. And so the extent to which you're concerned about being victim to that, or being influenced and affected through that, even the way in which it levies its authority in international bodies, well, America does that, and it does that quite often. And various political actors advocate for doing that more. or less, right? Someone to universalize American values, and America is an idea. It is an idea that has a certain social entailments in terms of social liberalism and the way societies should think about various causes. And you have politicians that will echo those, right? So it wasn't just Islam Said, but it was Joe Biden who said the same thing about the Hagia Sophia. You might try to appeal to state sovereignty and the authority of the nation state and say, why is it his business to try to intervene and comment on the domestic affairs of another country, right? But this is what these people do, right? And the least we should expect from Muslims is to care and have concern for their fellow brothers and sisters, because we're all part of the ummah. We're all part of the ummah. And if we see Muslims stepping out of line and betraying the ummah and articulating things that have no real relationship to the religion that they're speaking in the name of, then that needs to be corrected and called out. So I think that's a problem, right? And we're seeing this on a number of issues, right? Certainly the LGBT issue, which we brought up more than once now, is a global universalist program. And, Western, specifically American humanitarian organizations, they leverage international bodies to enforce these sort of liberal ideals. And it is becoming increasingly difficult for Muslim countries to maintain their own values and ideals and to uphold their own rights to a society of their own shaping, right? That they're losing the ground upon which they can appeal to their own sovereignty, and that is being undermined by the West and by the universalizing project of the American empire.
I mean, I throw that question back at you, Imam Dawood, but I'll add something on here because unless you wanted to add something else, Ustad Mubin, or is that okay?
No, go ahead, please.
Okay. So on that note, one of the arguments that's been made continuously for pro-Trump sentiments in the Muslim sphere, so like something that I saw a lot and something that sort of might have prompted my own leanings in terms of who I wanted to win in the presidential election, was what Ustad Mubin mentioned, the American empire. And there's this idea that in the era of Trump, the American empire has turned its gaze inwards. It doesn't care so much about what's happening around the world. America first, America matters, economic protectionism. And at the same time, in terms of a lot of Muslim issues, if you look at what Trump did, I mean, there was no world leader, especially within the Muslim world, you would be hard pressed to find one Muslim leader who spoke up for the cause of our brothers and sisters in East Turkestan, the Uyghur Muslims in China. And Donald Trump and Mike Pompeo and that whole, cabal, they're saying, oh, look, Xi Jinping, he's doing such and such, and China's done this, and we need to speak out, and we need to do this. And at the same time, in terms of the ideas that he lessened drone attacks, he didn't really, and all of these other arguments that are made.
Drone attacks, though, but.
But he's moved away from Afghanistan. He's opened talks with the Taliban for whatever reason. Allah knows best. So on that note, but on that note, just to sort of come back on that. So what would you say? Number one, why does the American election matter? And number two, I'd like to open this up now to this argument, because this is the key argument that's been made throughout this election for Muslims specifically, that you should back Trump because Trump is good for the pan-Muslim world.
Well, I would say, number one, I echo what Ustad Mubin said 100% about the American empire. What I would also say about this false illusion about America looking more inward, as Donald Trump used the words of nationalism and protectionism, he also, in his trade policies, and not just NAFTA, but in other countries, seek to increase American exports. And when America exports its goods, what America is probably the biggest exporter of culture in the world is the United States of America. So that did not increase at all under the time of Donald Trump, not whatsoever. So we should not be confused about that. In regards to his comment about our Uyghur brothers and sisters who are being oppressed by China, I'd like to quote, as it relates to Trump, something that Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu said about the Khawarij when they said that their statement, there's no rule except Allah. And he said, Kalimatul haq yuradu biha batil, right? it's a truthful statement, but really the intention behind the motive is bogus. So Trump sees China as, or at least rhetorically speaking, even though he has his MAGA hats made in China and he has investments in China and all this, right? But it's a political, China has been used as a political whipping board or as this existential threat that all empires need to invoke, or not existential threat, but a threat from the outside that empires have to, in order to invoke nationalism and also for political points, point an outside area. Because while Trump is talking about Uyghurs, Muslims, and Pompeo, at the same time, they pal around with Modi, right? They have no problem with what's going on with Muslims in Kashmir, and also moving the American embassy to Al-Quds, which is unprecedented. Trump even got rewarded with a town named after him, Trumpsville, in the Julan. And we forget about also that just as land of Palestinians is illegally occupied, land of our Syrian brothers and sisters is illegally occupied by America too. He got rewarded by bringing the U.S. embassy to Al-Quds. Trump has a whole village named after him now in occupied territory of the Muslims. So I think that we have to look a little bit past outward rhetoric of saying, well, Trump maybe is not meddling in the affairs as Muslims as much. No matter whether it's a Democrat or Republican, I think there's a level of meddling and a level of detriment that's going to take place to Muslim countries. So at the end of the day, America's first political aspiration by the duopoly that we have in America between the Democrat and Republican Party is preserving American empire, right? And if anyone thinks otherwise, I think there's a level of naivety, to be quite frank.
I don't know if you want to come in on that, Ustad Mubin, but about specifically the sort of geopolitical argument that's made for global Muslim interests and Trump specifically.
Yeah. I'll just add one thing. I think with Trump, and Allah knows best, I think if there's anyone that cares more about something else than the American empire, it's Trump. I think what Trump cares the most about is Trump. I don't know that there's anything that he takes as a priority to himself. Any cause, his attachment to just about any cause is instrumental. And he has shown a willingness to abandon and jump on to just about anything, provided that it helps him. And it helps his brand, and it helps his image. That is his fundamental commitment. He is as self-absorbed a human being as we have seen in quite some time. And so, the idea that, there's anything that can be vindicated as part of that, I think is a fool's gold, right? And just about every sphere. And so, yeah, Allah knows that.
And now we've had a good little period now bashing.
Trump is like Fir'aun in this narcissist, Ustad Mubin. He thinks he's the most high authority. Hence, what Ustad Mubin mentioned, this guy on national TV, that he doesn't think that he has to make tawbah to God. Like he doesn't even believe in seeking forgiveness and repentance. It's not even part of his intellectual framework.
Now, I will add to that it takes someone like that sociopathic to be able to get away with doing some of the things he's done, right? And so I think now he's trying to retreat out of Afghanistan, and he's trying to retreat out of Somalia, and he's pushing the envelope on those. And now you're seeing everyone out of the defense, national security agencies, national intelligence, and the Defense Department, right? The Joint Chiefs and others coming out against Trump, trying to prevent that from happening, along with interventionist Democrats that are trying to now push back against that and salvage the American global military presence. So the military-industrial complex is kind of frustrated by him, but his whole point is there's nothing in it for me to keep these people here. He doesn't care about any of those regions. He's not saying, oh, we've sort of overextended ourselves, and he's saying, no, this is just a drain on our resources, and we just need to look out for ourselves. And that's been his basic philosophy from day one. And so I think he'll expand American interest when it suits his needs, and he will pull back when it suits his needs. And that is the only thing that he seems to prioritize or check.
I think some people would counter that to just say, and just the idea that maybe if Trump's self-interest does happen to correlate with Muslim global self-interest, then that's not necessarily a bad thing. His intention is really sort of irrelevant to all of that. So
yeah, I mean okay, so let's just say his sort of interest happens to coincide with us on Uyghurs or something. Well, the question is like how serious is his commitment to that, right? How far is he willing to push that envelope? We've seen at times his willingness to praise Xi Jinping. And we've also seen, even from John Bolton's book, that Trump doesn't seem to care a whole lot about that issue. He just instrumentalizes it and weaponizes it when it works for him, and it drops it when it doesn't, right? And so, that has been a big issue in terms of really advancing policies that would be a little more muscular in pushing back against China, insofar as its relationship to Muslims is toxic right now, and it is actively participating in the oppression of Muslims in its own territories.
I mean, we've had I think, I don't know how long it's been about half an hour we've been bashing Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So I think in just in the cause of being balanced, I think it's time now to turn to our some people are calling him Yusuf Biden, who in the lead up to, and I mean, in terms of like America, the liberal empire, I mean, one of the things that has been maybe a negative side effect of America sort of pulling back from everything is the fact that China is now starting to fill in all the spaces, and that's becoming even more problematic to an extent. I read an article in The Atlantic recently about how a lot of the global organizations that America used to head and used to, at least, with America, you can point a finger and you know what's going on, and it's sort of more open than the Chinese society. Then it becomes very problematic when China starts to take charge of all of these institutes. But just coming to Joe Biden, in the lead up to the election, very famously, I mean, we were talking, Imam Dawood spoke about kalimatul haq arada bihi al-batil, or kama qala Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib, the statement and the idea that, every now and then people speak the language of Marxism and they chuck in a hadith. Yusuf Biden, in the lead up to the election debate, in the election debate itself, actually, the very famous inshaAllah moment that suddenly airwaves, everybody got really excited, Muslims, having fireworks going off in their heads. Oh, this is amazing. And not just that, there's even, I think somebody actually put a nasheed behind it, but there's a video of him quoting the hadith of Sunan al-Tirmidhi, man ra'a minkum munkaran, whosoever amongst you sees an evil. And that became like a big meme, like, oh, look, Joe Biden's quoting a hadith, and a lot of people got really excited about that. I guess with Joe Biden specifically, there was a massive mobilization of Muslims in America. And we can maybe talk about the M-Gage movement that came out in support of Joe Biden, that sort of really promoted his interests. And there's been a lot of talk about them and the danger that but at the same time, we saw with Joe Biden this sort of two-faced hypocrisy in that, and we mentioned this with Jonathan Brown when he came on, that suddenly when I won't mention the name, but one of the activist sisters came out in support of the Joe Biden campaign, straight away they said they disregarded her and they said she's got nothing to do with us, we don't care about her. And they projected this idea that they care about Muslims, but at the same time, when Muslims, or at least people perceived to be representatives of the Muslim community, came out in support of them, they abandoned them at the first instant. So how should I guess even in like the fact that he quoted Quran and Hadith, I mean, that's very, beyond the fact that Barack Obama's middle name was a Muslim name, the idea that somebody actually comes out unequivocally, quotes the Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, says the word inshaAllah, is that something that Muslims should get excited about, or is that just more of this, the racialization of Muslims and more of the problem? And either of you can come in on this one.
Well, Obama quoted that same Hadith.
Oh,
matter of fact, Obama went to Jamal Azhar and sounded like Sheikh al-Islam, I guess, right? Some Muslims, he was the next coming of the Mujaddid, I guess, to some Muslims, really, like the excitement that some Muslims had regarding that situation. So, quoting Hadith is all good and well, but I think it's really a sad commentary, not on them, but really on us as Muslims, that we get excited over little trinkets. And I think that this is part of the I would say there's two factors to this. One, the feeling of wanting to be accepted, right? That many people in our community have felt like we've been under siege as a community since 9/11. So we have one candidate who will quote a hadith, and he'll say maybe he'll make a couple of appointments in his administration, some Muslims. So, oh well, at least this guy feigns that he likes us as Muslims, right? So this is the attitude really of a defeated people, to be quite frank. I think the second factor is a lack of political education. If Muslims who are not black, and including some Muslims who are black who have seemed to have forgotten the history, don't know the history, if they only did a cursory study of how the Democratic establishment has catered towards African Americans since the Civil Rights Movement and has absolutely done nothing of any substance except rhetoric, then the quoting of the hadith of the Prophet alayhi salam could be put in the proper context. This is nothing but classic pandering and similar tactics of like Hillary Clinton running for president and doing the ceremony, eating at Sylvia's Soul Food in Harlem, and then going on a popular radio show called The Breakfast Club. And they asked her, you know, what do you keep in your purse when you travel every day? And she said hot sauce, speaking to all black community, you know, because all black people, I guess, we like to eat fried chicken with hot sauce, right? So it's like, and people, or Bill Clinton going on Arsenio Hall show and playing the saxophone. So some people said, oh, Bill Clinton's the first black president because he plays jazz music and maybe likes a rapper, right? So this is really simple type of thinking, I believe, from a lot of Muslims. Now let me pivot back to the issue on which Biden campaigned through that one particular activist underneath the bus. Well, I think what also added insult to injury in that is that, and I know this for a fact, and I know people on the call, his campaign then made a private call to this particular activist with a couple of other people and apologized, but apologized privately after a public diss, right? So it really shows. And then this one particular activist then put their full energy into the Biden campaign, and to me, it's a smack in the face. It's like where's our Izzah? Like as a community, like if you diss me and you can't make amends publicly for a public transition, then that's nothing but using me. And it's like well, I won't use that analogy, but it really shows how much respect that campaign has for our community. They use us for our votes. They use us for campaign contributions. But that's a sign, I believe, of when the next controversy comes to our community, that administration will be quick to throw Muslims underneath the bus publicly, right? It's like it's so predictable. And the Obama administration, Barack Hussein Obama, who invited Muslims to the White House for some hummus and tabbouleh while he gave weapons to Israel to bomb Gaza during Ramadan. But we Muslims, we love that because he said Ramadan Mubarak and gave us some hummus and some tabboulehs, mashallah, we love Mujaddid Barack Hussein Obama, right? So, but he disrespected our community, right? So but I don't blame them as much as I blame us. It's a lack of internal fortitude.
I turn this question straight back onto you, Ustad Mubin, and I'd love for you to maybe on the point that Imam Dawood mentioned about the idea of we need to turn this back on us in terms of how the concept of the Muslim and how the Muslim is perceived in the modern vernacular, in the postmodern vernacular even. What Biden did seems to really tie into that, the racialization of Islam as a concept. So I'd love to just get your thought on the pandering, or the alleged pandering that was done by Joe Biden, and then in terms of how Muslims are seeing themselves as an identity, and how what Biden done just sort of ties into that.
Sure. So this is perhaps a bit of a simplification, but I'll try to explain what I've seen by way of community transitions. I think what you've had for a long time with Muslims is a feeling of sort of just being under assault, right? You have many grievances vis-a-vis your own relationship with the country and the extent to which you feel part of it. And for a long time after 9/11, you had a bipartisan discourse that routinely ostracized and alienated Muslims and made Muslims feel like they could only belong to this country if they capably and firmly demonstrated their patriotism, right? If you're a patriot, you have to show it, because the default is that as a Muslim, you have conflicting loyalties to this country. And so what we had after 9/11 amongst a lot of Muslim organizations was this very public jingoism, right? And jingoism became part and parcel of American Muslim institutions, where American flags are on stage, and you're doing the Pledge of Allegiance, and you're inviting congressmen and showing how we're here and we're not going anywhere else, and you become far more patriotic than even like the average American is, right? Almost cartoonish levels, right? And then I think you had from young Muslims, especially during the Trump administration, but perhaps started during Obama's second term, a sort of rejection of a lot of that discourse, a resentment for that, not only amongst Muslims, but I think amongst a lot of the public. And progressivism emerges out of that womb to a large extent, which is a discourse that looks at American society and Western society and says that America has not reckoned with its history, nor has it taken itself fully to account with the way that it treats marginalized peoples. And out of that, you have a discourse of intersectionality and victimology. And it became a very attractive and alluring proposition for Muslims who for so long had felt out of place, because suddenly there was a narrative in a social space where they could belong. Now,
Just on that note, would you mind elaborating what you mean by intersectionality and victimology?
Broadly, intersectionality is there's a lot of components of it. This idea that I'm comprised of myriad identities, and those identities intersect and they come together to formulate new forms of individual relationships with their society and the oppressions that those relate to. So I'm a brown person, and I'm a woman, and I'm a Muslim, and I'm this, and I'm that, and all these identities come together. It is also this notion that there's an intersecting set of oppressions, and all of those oppressions are being undergirded by the same sort of foundation of hate. So whether it's Islamophobia or homophobia or transphobia or racism and all that, it is a consistent set of factors that we have to collectively argue and fight against, because we are all in a shared cause and in a shared moment. That is the very general high-level narrative. Now, what happens as part of this is that people who participate in this really take on a very fulsome notion of their own victimhood, right? And it's not that you don't have grievances, but it becomes that what defines you is those grievances. And I think about, there's the famous Eleanor Roosevelt quote that no one can make you feel inferior without your own consent, right? And so there's this internalizing of your own inferiority, of your own weakness, of your own enfeeblement. And there's the celebrating of it, of me as a person who is marginalized and dispossessed and powerless. And we're coming together on that basis to just relish and celebrate how oppressed we are, to marinate in the fact that what defines our existence is the fact that we have no means of our own, no agency to act of our own accord, right? This is all we're ever doing. And I think what you have out of a lot of groups, and I think even a lot of Muslims, certainly Muslims that we don't see on social media, is just a resentment of that. Like the only thing I'm supposed to be is this weak and feeble human being who has no strength of resolve, no conviction, no courage to live, right? People are attracted to strength. And that articulation of individuality is rooted in this sort of fragility, right? This constant sensitivity to my own vulnerability, instead of my strength and my willingness to overcome times of difficulty. And this is where, and I think one of the most obnoxious, one of the most obnoxious things that I see out of this is the instrumentalizing of people like Malcolm X, rahimahullah, and reconfiguring him into a symbol of the vulnerability program, of the victim narrative, and not of the expression of, I am a person who is going to stand for what I believe in, everyone else be damned, right? The acceptability of what I'm saying does not matter to me. Popular acceptance can go wherever it needs to go. What matters to me is that I'm going to stand for what is right. That is what matters to me, right? And I think that there is an opportunity for that in the Muslim community right now, and it is a tremendous vacuum. And I think what you see with Muslims, and many Muslims, is just a growing frustration with this and the way in which it speaks on behalf of us and speaks on behalf of just brown and black people as if they own them, and that all of whatever they pursue as part of the progressive agenda is a de facto expression of what we care about and what our needs are, instead of allowing us to speak for ourselves. And my concern, and I'll just mention this with the Biden administration, is that what you're getting with the Biden administration potentially, and I think that this is perhaps even likely, is a certain types of liberal centrism on the questions of interventionism in the military, because Biden is very much beholden to the military industrial complex, a sort of revival of the old school Wall Street neoliberal capitalism, right? So a retrenchment of what happened there, and a very strong progressive social identity. So he's going to go hard on diversity and, incorporating racial diversification and ethnic. So his administration is going to be a lot more diverse, and it's going to capitulate and pander to the identity politics and go hard left on social issues. And that's how he wins over his progressive voices, right? So on the LGBT stuff and everything else, go very far to the left on that, but be basically a center Republican on all of these other more difficult issues where he realizes he can't really cross any lines. So the best parts of their platform, he abandons, and the worst parts of the platform, he owns, right? And that is really the concern for me.
I agree with Ustad Mubin. If I can add on to something he said, and he did a good job of summing up the whole issue of intersectionality. But we also have to realize in the American context that as there are one outside stimuli of this constant threat of so-called Islamophobia, that made Muslims in America feel that they had to prove their Americanness and their patriotism. And then we have seen in younger Muslims a type of rejectionism of that performative so-called respectability politics. Some of the political movements and organizing movements in our community have not come out of a vacuum, meaning that some of these far left progressive organizations began to take and train certain activists, gave stipends to certain activists, and then in the case of one particular organization led by Muslims, actually gave 100% of the seed money to start a new organization inside the Muslim community that is not funded by the American Muslim community, but has some popular face in front of it, or popular people in front of it, that has sought to try to socially, politically remake the American Muslim community and their far left progressive image. So it's not just something that is happenstance due to certain social political developments that have come about why American Muslims have gone so far to the left. as a reaction is also well thought out planning, funding by certain far left foundations that have actually funded certain initiatives in the American Muslim community that have introduced and helped popularize certain language. I mean, I would have never thought 20 years ago that I would actually hear some Muslims saying sex work is real work. But this is now the reality, because the ACLU and certain feminist organizations have now, they have a goal of legalizing prostitution in the United States of America, and where you even have people who are prominent people, muhajibat, who will even say, my body, my choice, and will like give sanctioning to prostitution, right? But all this just isn't simply, my point is not just simply something that is completely organic and reflexive. There's people who have eyes on using the American Muslim community for their agenda. And probably when we talk about intersectionality, if you can get someone who's Black, someone who's Muslim, wears hijab, and identifies as queer or non-gender binary, then you have the whole you have the entire package. You have the entire package of this complete victim that can be used to promote a particular socio-political reprogramming or social engineering in American society.
When that reminds me of, I don't know, I think it's Slavoj Žižek, famous Slovenian philosopher, who speaks about this idea of it's victimhood is power, and then when people realize that, then it's the battle to see it's the battle to the bottom of the pecking order. I mean, I do want to switch it over now, because you've spoken about a few times now about this sort of working class this sort of pushback that's happened against the performative, and that is partly what we saw with people voting for Trump within minorities, in ways that I think it was no Republican president has ever seen the minority vote that Trump saw in this election. But I just wanted to ask you one question very specifically, Ustad Imam Dawood, about Kamala Harris. I think because of what she's being portrayed as the first Black woman who's been voted into this very high position of office, but at the same time, I mean, I don't know how, in terms of her representation within the Black community, because it's very, America's a very sort of strange place in the sense that I think you guys have the one drop rule, that because Kamala Harris is half Indian, I think also, so there's no idea of Kamala Harris, the Indian, who become, and a lot of this will be very hurt by that, and there's like that joke that was doing the rounds that Kamala Harris's mum probably sees her and says, vice president, why didn't you become president, you failed me, or whatever, like the famous thing about South Asian parents. But basically I just wanted to start that with specifically on Kamala Harris, this idea. I mean, why in America do we have this idea that Kamala Harris is a Black woman, whereas in Brazil she would be seen as an Indian woman? And at the same time, is this seen as some sort of victory? I mean Obama is probably the greatest victory the Black representation has ever seen, but is Kamala Harris now, should it be seen as something, as a victory for the Black community, or especially the Black Muslim community?
Well, let me say first is Muslims African Americans in general, we have to keep in mind that when she actually ran for the Democratic nomination for president, she wasn't even in the top 3, and she polled horribly amongst African Americans. She did not resonate with the African American community when she was running for the Democratic nomination, in part because of her perceived record as being a prosecutor in the state of California. And she herself did not prosecute a number of high-profile cases in which law enforcement committed extrajudicial murders of unarmed Black people, right? So she wasn't, in the Black community, she wasn't popping this time last year. Like, no one was like caring about Kamala Harris. The other thing is, you mentioned this one drop rule, it kind of relates to the absurdity of the whole construct of race in general, but in America. So her mother is Tamil. From my understanding, she would go back to India every summer and spent time and know how to make masala dosa and and chana and all this type of stuff. Her and her sister. Matter of fact, I heard in India they were actually pulling for her to win, and Hindus are doing prayers and these sorts of things on the one hand, and then she claims to be black. To my understanding, I don't even think her father is even all of African descent, because as you I'm sure know that in the Caribbean, there's a large percentage of actually South Asians who were brought for as indentured servants or type of like slaves in islands such as Trinidad and Jamaica. And even when you look at a picture of her father, he didn't even look African or black, right? But nonetheless, we live in the age of transgender. Maybe she's transracial. She didn't even look like a black woman to me. But besides that, I don't think that it's I'm being serious. When I look at her, I see a Tamil woman. I see a Desi woman. From her hair to her facial features, I don't see a black woman at all. She's done a good job of code switching and selectively using a black accent at certain times, and lying about when she was in Howard University and smoking weed, listening to Tupac Shakur when Tupac's rap career wasn't even out yet. But she got busted for that. I think that I'm not sure about black people or Muslims, but I think black people in general have just felt that for our 300 years here that we've been so dogged out and so disrespected that even representation of us that we believe to see that represents us within a system that was not built for our advancement is still seen as a victory. And many black people see this. However, there is a strong pushback within the black community. And let me be specific, black American men, not the women as much. You'll see that even statistically speaking, the increasement of the black vote for Trump was much more so amongst black men than for black women, right? And there are also reasons for this. And part of this is, wanting to do something for self and trying to fight out of this victim hood framework, right? Where people don't want to accept this for themselves because it's not dignified, right? But I don't think that Kamala Harris, her being in the White House is going to do any sort of tangible advancement and improvement for the Black American community. And I don't think that's going to do anything tangible to help Muslims who are Black or Muslims in general. I don't really see too much behind it, because she is part and parcel of the liberal establishment.
In terms of now, I think it will be a good segue to come to the idea of representation, because we've spoken a few times now about Black representation, Muslim representation, Black Muslim representation very specifically. We have, okay, I'm gonna let's see if I can get this. So you have in America the Senate and the House of Representatives, and those both make up Congress. Am I right in saying that? Okay, that's good. Okay, so in you have Muslim Congress people. So you have very, very famously, and I assume we can mention their names because of the public figures that they are. You have Ilhan Omar, you have Keith Ellison. Those are the two I know of that are very sort of famous. I don't know if there's others. Maybe there are others whose names I've forgotten. So you have this idea of Muslims that are represented within the US political establishment. And that's and Rashida Tlaib, and Allah knows best, because she has some very problematic statements specifically on creed, and I don't want to, and maybe that's something we could even bring up, because she said something about ascribing gender to Allah Jalla wa Ala. May he is sanctified beyond, he is beyond anything that anybody can attribute to him, Jalla wa Ala. But there are statements that she's made of that regard. So this idea, now we have Muslims in Congress, and this is seen as some sort of boon, because even those Muslims who are sort of very morally grounded, will say, and we've heard mashayikh say, and very respected scholars whose names we won't mention have said, regardless of the things they've come out with, like Ilhan Omar has been seen carrying out some the dancing at the LGBT parade that a lot of people had a problem with, and rightly so. They are still Muslim voices, and but some representation is better than no representation, and we have to be pragmatic in our understanding and political pragmatism, a la Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, who is the father of, I guess, Islamic political pragmatism, or the idea of maslahah, and such things. So I guess I really want to start open this now, this idea of Muslim representation. How important is this idea? Is Muslim representation necessary in the political world? I mean, just as a side note, I mentioned in England we have Muslim representatives within both parties. Actually, we have in UK is a bit different in that sense that we don't have such. You can have Muslims who are right wing and Muslims who are left wing as well. And at the same time, their Islam is absolutely negligible. It doesn't mean a thing really where they are, and it's just. They're there and they're just a voice and a face, and it just sort of and they win the votes in the Muslim communities because we have very strong constrained Muslim communities. So just on that note, I'd love to open up this topic of discussion. So this idea of Muslim representation within Congress, and is Muslim representation necessarily a good thing, or is it something that we should be very, very wary of? I mean, Ustad Mubin, I'd love for you to sort of come in on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think you probably get where I'm going based on what we've already discussed. But that representation and the chase for it is just a lizard hole, right? There's no getting out of that. You just get lost in political space and trying to find idols there that you can look up to. I'd make two arguments. I'd say one, even on purely pragmatic grounds, I don't know that there would be anything worth honoring or celebrating about the Muslims that are in politics today. If someone is going to say, well, we have some representation and it's positive that we have like Ilhan and Rashida and all them, but they don't poll well nationally, right? They are looked at as representing the far left of their party. They do things that no one else in their party does. I mean, Ilhan, like the trans, whatever, like nightclubs, and no one else in her party is doing these things. Right? So even in purely political terms, she's a bit of a radical actor on the left, even within the progressive space. She's always on the front lines, right? And she's extremely provocative and all of those things. So if someone says, well, we want to rally and consolidate behind them, we're setting ourselves up to be hated by a lot of people who don't agree with their politics, which is the vast majority of this country. So if someone's just going to set the deen aside, just completely ignore the deen of Allah, and just talk like that, I'd say, what do you see sensibly occurring politically with them? On what grounds would you make that determination? Where are the perceived masalih that you're promising to us, right? At least try to exposit them. At least make an attempt to articulate them without taking for granted just any representation for us is positive, right? Because that is a joke, right? That is a joke. So that's because if you're just saying anybody with like a brown face or something is just, or hijab or whatever is just de facto positive because it in some way, shape, or form helps normalize Muslims, right? Then someone would say, okay, let's like celebrate ex-Muslims, right? Who still carry a Muslim name and are well liked because they're like comedians or this and that, right? Aziz Ansari or something, we should be happy, and we should recognize in this Machiavellian way that in the aggregate, he helps other Desi Muslims because he has this Muslim name, and even though he's really inappropriate and funny and all that, and has left Islam, whatever, right? He's still in this way as somebody that we should be like happy about in a closeted sense. Like that is where people's souls go to die, right? It is a soul-killing activity to think that way, okay? And when you think about what's really the most astonishing about this is how little scrutiny that they apply to the types of politics these people advance, right? And so even when you take someone like Ilhan Omar, right? Not only if someone goes to the extreme, let's just do like a reductio ad absurdum with what she said with Brunei. And let's say that the reason she opposed Brunei and as people know, she came out against Brunei's authority to establish a had penalty against the acts of sodomy. The act of sodomy, I believe that was what was under deliberation, and other
And also zina.
Also zina, yes. So you had this collection of what they were attempting to do, and she came out against. Let's say that her concern was born out of a desire to not. She may have been worried about their Sharia qualifications and how much deen that they had studied and whether they would have the insight and the tarbiyah to apply. Let's just say that that was her opposition. Let's just say that. She came out against the Palestinian Authority prohibiting and not allowing a pride event in the West Bank. She came out against that. This is a Muslim government, the Muslim society saying that this violates our values, and she criticized them and condemned them. Right? I mean, what right does she have to do that? What an extreme, extreme violation of your own, just any commitment to a shared solidarity with other Muslims who are oppressed and living their deen and saying, no, we're not going to have a pride march in the middle of our town. We're not going to allow that. And she comes out and condemns them for that? I mean, at some point, people have to say, look, I can't continue to stand by this. There has to be a line where we say, no, like enough is enough. And that's my position, because what happens is when you just overlook one violation after the other, and it is a demoralizing program. You become demoralized as an individual. That's what happens. And I think that is such a damaging prospect, and it's a damaging reality. This is what we're seeing out of Muslims, right? A sort of complete apathy, and you're making belief and faith something entirely irrelevant to the way that they live their life and see the world. And if that's what you want to promote, then I'm sorry, like I can't stand with that. And I think scholars who are willing or popular enough that they are sadly and badly mistaken, and Allah knows best.
Imam Dawood, I mean, obviously this is one of the very central issues in terms of Muslims and politics in the West. I'm going to turn the question to you, but I just want to add a few things. One of the things that we saw in the pre-discussion that we had when we were getting ready for this is you were very clear to me about the decorum. We have to have adab in reference to our Muslim brothers and sisters. And this idea, I guess, Ustad Mubin sort of referenced it and referred to it as well. Oh, you have to have husnul dhan. This is a basic etiquette that the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us. You have husnul dhan of your brother in every single form that you can have. And so in terms of, for example, Rashida Tlaib, I will say, if what was said regarding her, that she said that the reference to gender to the Lord of the heavens and the earth, subhanahu wa ta'ala, azza wa jalla, is true, many people would say that is rightful grounds to say that she's no longer a Muslim, if what she said was said and if all the conditions are fulfilled. In terms of our Muslim political figures, we see the ulama have been very clear that do not expect your politicians to be the Hassan al-Basri of their time. There are clear statements of the likes of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, and even from the times of the Salaf, that do not expect Marwan, the Umayyad governors will not be, you have to give them allegiance, they could be horrible people, but you don't turn a blind eye, but you have to sort of be pragmatic and understand that this is very important. Number one, so on that point. And then the second thing I also want you to reference is there was a bit of controversy, and I only mention this because you've given me permission to mention this, in terms of I think you mentioned the great trifecta of, what was it, queer, Muslim, and a woman, which was one of the candidates in some sort of election that took place in America. And there was a big furore over the fact that some people claimed, from what I saw, and you will inshallah clarify the matter for us, that CARE, the organization that you work for, and alhamdulillah do a great job, endorsed this candidate, and this was what was claimed. And I know you will have the opportunity to clarify what really happened. So on those 2 points, how far do we take husnul dhan? Is representation necessarily a good thing? And what actually happened in the CARE case that people are making a big deal about?
Well, number one, we should have husnul dhan for our brothers and sisters in Islam. And this is part of makarim al-akhlaq, of us having noble traits of character, as our Prophet alayhi salam had expressed noble traits of character with his Sahaba, some of them who did varying things, including a youth asking him for permission to commit zina, right? Like we know that the Sahaba, you know, it was all sorts of refinement of character. They were on different levels when they came into Islam. And we recognize that. May Allah be well pleased with the righteous companions. So that should be the default, right? The second point is, I think as Muslims, we need to raise the bar on what we expect from people who are being involved. Yeah, we do have people such as under Bani Umayyah, such as Marwan ibn al-Hakim, who was a very unsavory fellow. But then we have also in Islamic history, we have people such as the Abbasi Khalifa an-Nasir, who was the Khalifa during the time of when Al-Quds was retaken with Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. And we know that this man was a man of great character and fatwa. We have a man who was a Zahid and an alim, but also was a political figure in West Africa and Nigeria, Sheikh Uthman bin Fudi, rahmatullah alayhi. We have even before him, Mawlaya Idris al-Azhar, the start the Idrisit or the Adarisa led government, Ahlul Bayt, in North Africa, right? And these are people who were involved in politics and making considerations, yet very pious. So I think that, you know, we need to actually raise the bar of what we expect from our community and who we actually want to support. And we need to invest in people, in their Islamic education, as well as their political knowledge, that we begin to push forward people who follow a more traditional path of Islam and not this very radical understanding. It's not only radical out of Islamic discourse, but radical even according to mainstream liberalism in America, which Ustad Mubin, he actually, subhanAllah, he pointed out something that I didn't even know about regarding that Pride parade in Palestine. I didn't even know that. I didn't even know that one. So that it's really shocking. May Allah guide us all. Now, in regards to the sister winning the state house in Oklahoma, let me be clear that number one, CARE National, nor the Oklahoma chapter of CARE endorsed this sister when she ran. So we have to get this straight. CARE is CARE National, as well as CARE Oklahoma, are both incorporated 501c3 nonprofit organizations, which there is no explicit endorsement by the national office or by chapters. Now, what CARE Oklahoma did do is that they gave her a congratulations after she won the election, recognizing this sister, this person as being a Muslim who identifies as non-binary. For those of you who don't know, basically it means that a person who is biologically one gender, in this case, this sister has XX chromosomes, but the person feels that they are neither male nor female, so they are neither here nor there. They're just hayawan. Okay. So that's on one end, and I use that word. They're a human being. They're a mammal. They're from the ints, but they're neither dhakar nor untha. Okay.
I'm just a madrasa graduate, so when one of your teachers called you hayawan, it didn't mean just a mammal.
Yeah,
It
no,
was
hayawan have another. That's why I clarified it, right? I'm not meaning it in the sense of calling her an animal. Thank you. So the other, or her viewing herself as that. So CARE Oklahoma was criticized for saying, "Wait a second, you're recognizing this person as a Muslim who clearly is celebrating, who identifies and celebrating a LGBTQ plus identity, which completely violates Islamic sacred law. We don't understand. We believe that gender is a divine construct. It's not a man-made construct, right? So this is number one. Now, on the other hand, CARE Oklahoma also got criticized from people to the far left, because when they congratulated her, they said, "Oh, you're erasing her identity," or you're erasing their identity, because CARE Oklahoma didn't call her a them or a they, because that person, when you're non-binary, you don't say that you're a she or a he, you're them or they, which, by the way, violates the rules of English grammar, because this person isn't a plural, they're a singular person. So it's grammatically incorrect. But then CARE Oklahoma got criticized on the other half, because they didn't use the proper pronouns in congratulating this person who won for the so this is really, when we talk about the issue of fitna and confusion, where people, as it's mentioned in the Ihya of Imam Ghazali, that the hadith, Al-Iraqi did a takhrij on this. It's not, we don't see this hadith is sahih or hasan according to isnad, but it's correct according to the meaning, where it says that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "How will you be when you see the mahruf as munkar? And how will you be when you see the munkar as mahruf?" And literally, we are in a situation right now where people are literally taking something that should be known, because mahruf literally means that which is known to, right? And then we'll criticize someone for calling someone who's clearly a she, because that person doesn't feel like a she. So this is the level of confusion that we have in Muslim America right now. May Allah help us. It's really bizarre. It's really bizarre. It's really bizarre.
Just to maybe move on now to Ustad Mubin on a similar note. I mean, I guess one of what you mentioned here in this sort of reductionism that's taken place in terms of Muslim identity within the discourse, secular liberalism, is the curious case of two individuals. And I just want to bring these up, and maybe Imam Dawood can come on this one too. But Qasim Rashid, who became the poster child of all things Islamic. Now, I don't know if you know Qasim Rashid. Okay, then I'll take...
I mean, like I think he lost recently, right?
Yeah, so he was a Qadiani.
Yeah.
So he stood as a candidate.
He still is a Qadiani.
Yeah. He still is. Yeah, there's no one. I think.
All right. Yeah. Sorry. So he is a Qadiani, and he stood for election, and he got absolutely. There was this big sudden, when Indo-Pak Muslims and Khatamun Nabuwa. Wow, it's like a marriage made in heaven. It's an amazing thing to see. And there was this galvanization of the Pakistani Muslim vote, where they all came out, voted for this. I think he might have been explicitly like racist guy or something. He was like a really pro-Trump Republican. And they were like, whatever happens, that guy has to win, because we can't have a Qadiani. But just the idea that the fact that Qasim Rashid now stands in the eyes of the American public as a Muslim, and he has the ability to do that regardless of the fact that he is a kafir, by virtue of the fact that he has denied a very fundamental fact of aqidah, of the finality of the prophethood of the Prophet ﷺ. On that note as well, in terms of Muslims and in terms of representation, again, I also would love to bring up the case of, we have within the Muslim community, there's I think Craig Considine is the very famous example, and I don't know if you find, if you don't mind me bringing him up, because and a lot of people have pointed out that he should be seen as a very problematic figure, because he'll come out and he'll say, in the same way that Qasim Rashid denies the finality of the Prophet ﷺ, Craig Considine is a Christian, and he comes out and he says, well, here's the Prophet Muhammad as a pluralist, and he sounds very perennialist in his thought, and Muslims get really excited, because I don't know, maybe because there's a white guy saying nice things about Islam, and they haven't seen that happen a lot before, and they start remembering what happened in the 19th century when they were in India, and the Anglo whatever, and suddenly they're like, oh, Craig Considine said good things about the Prophet ﷺ. And there's like an extended version of that where you see whenever Rabiul Awwal comes around, suddenly, oh, what did Aldous Huxley say about the Prophet ﷺ? Oh, Michael Hart put the Prophet ﷺ number one. Oh, he was an anti-Semite and he was a Nazi, but that doesn't matter because he said the Prophet ﷺ number one on his list of most amazing figures in the history of humanity. So I'd love to just get your thoughts on this sort of these two figures very specifically. And if you don't want to talk about Qasim Rashid, I'm fine, and I'll take that one to Imam Dawood. But the idea of how the Qadiani has managed to become a poster child of Islamic compassionate discourse, and also the fact that the fact that just because Craig Considine said nice things about the Prophet ﷺ, he's now rocking up at ISNA conferences and ICNA conferences, and there's like a massive, I think there's an Aqidah issue at heart here that would be worth discussing.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good question. I'll mention a couple of things. I think Qasim Rashid is not as big of a problem only because he ruined his own sort of standing with a lot of Muslims when he came out and basically said anyone who says, La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah, and that the Prophet ﷺ is Khatam al-Nubuwah, he's like, that's a telltale sign of extremism, right? He had said something along those lines, which I think to a lot of people was sort of a wake-up call to this guy willing to deploy sectarianism against the Muslim community in ways that make our fundamental creed and tashahhud a artifact of fundamentalism and radicalism. And up until that point, he probably had a little more support, and I think he lost some of it, a good number of it. I don't think he lost his election because of Muslims. I mean, I think people need to just be honest about, it's not like Muslims have that like even where sort of his district and all that, it's not as if they're numerous enough to account for just how badly he lost, right? He lost his constituency. That's the bottom line. And there's probably other reasons. I'm not familiar enough with sort of the local dynamics there to fully account for why he lost so bad, being an incumbent, but he did, right? There's that. I think where you probably will get a bigger issue is with somebody who is like him, a Qadiani, but is much more congenial towards sort of the Muslim community, is better at sort of concealing where those theological differences are, and seems to be much more interested in advancing sort of an anti-Islamophobia platform and everything else. And so Muslims have to determine, well, and I think the challenge here is that it's coinciding in a moment with the loss of real theological rigor, right? I think Imam Dawood said he sort of misses the 90s. And I can appreciate that as well, because what you had was in the 90s, even though you had a lot of sectarian conflict, and you don't have that same sectarian conflict today, but you don't have that, the sort of loss of sectarian conflict is not because you had different groups that reconciled with each other on principled grounds, right? Theologically principled grounds. You just had a collective apathy where those issues, people just stopped caring. People simply stopped caring, right? And that is the issue that you're having with Muslims, is where their beliefs vis-a-vis God, his messenger, والسلام, and everything else that exists there is simply less important to them as individuals. And we've seen that with Christianity, right? If you see polls where Christians are polled and they're asked about how important or essential is it for a Christian to believe in the Trinity or Jesus being the Son of God. I mean, Christians, they just don't care. They don't see it as like a real important part. What's more important about Christianity? Just being compassionate and kind and this and that. And like Judaism, right? Like I think in a recent poll amongst Jews, especially amongst Reform Jews, like having a good sense of humor pulled higher than believing in God for what it means to be a Jew, right? They said, hey, a Jew has a good sense of humor. That's like more indicative and instructive for what it means to be a Jewish person than belief in God or following the laws and the Torah and everything else. And so Muslims have to be on guard insofar as they're living in a society where really strong faith communities don't exist in large numbers. And where as a community, we have very strong legal instruction, we have a strong theological creed, and we have a belief system that is really quite expansive insofar as it instructs us how to live in this world. And, politics is one of those domains where the seeming ambivalence to it simply comes out And it comes out where, you know, someone like Craig Considine, you know, you're just very insecure. Here's a guy who's supporting you. He has a public platform, and you just start jumping on him, even if he is radically distorting the seerah and the Prophet time and time again. It's like, why do you keep going to this guy for religious instruction? Why don't you just look to your own sort of religious leadership to understand what the deen says? But again, this is to me symptomatic of a much, much broader problem that we're seeing with Muslims, with their faith. And we have to figure out how we can recover an understanding of our faith that addresses those bigger questions, right? And that teaches people that a life of Islam is a life worth living, right? The life.
I'd love to get your thoughts on that as well, Imam Dawood. And I've seen that we've got some comments, and I'll bring them up, inshallah, in due course. But again, on you know, Craig Considine rocking up at ISNA. I don't know if was it Bernie spoke at RIS or something. You know, like, I mean, what's to say Qasim Rashid shouldn't rock up at ISNA himself then? Because if Bernie can come and he's a secular atheist Jew and he's not a Muslim and he says nice things, I mean, Qasim Rashid beyond, I mean, he's very, you know, like, if there's a poster child for taqiyya, then I think Qasim Rashid does a very good job of it, that he doesn't openly come out and say, by the way, I believe such and such, and I'm not really a Muslim, but I'm just doing this to sort of sneak in and get, he says nice things, and he's got some, I watched a video of Qasim Rashid on YouTube where some guy was having some very right-wing, very strong pro-Trump guy had some really life-changing operation he needed, and Qasim Rashid went and got him his treatment, and he said, this is what my religion teaches me. And I was like, if I didn't know any better, I'd be like, Qasim Rashid, mashallah, good brother, and he's, you know, great manners and a poster child of Islam. So how should we see this like you know, bringing out these type of people in as in public, very, very public Muslim conferences and things, and how does it reflect us as communities, the fact that they've got such a...
Well, I frankly don't think that they need to be invited to Muslim conferences or gatherings at all. And I'll tell you why, as far as Qasim Rashid, for instance. Reason being why I say that is when you're dealing with someone and inviting someone who's not a Muslim, even if you disagree with their theology, but you're inviting them for a limited specific purpose, then it's very clear this person isn't a Muslim, and therefore they do hold some beliefs that run counter to our aqidah, right? But when you actually bring this person on who is believed to be a Muslim or can be perceived to be a Muslim and invite, this could give people, especially people who are weak in their faith or aren't Islamically literate, that say, this is nothing but another expression of Islam that is legitimate. Like if someone, for instance, was Ash'ari or Maturidi or Ibadi or Zaidi or something like that, where there's some of these differences. And I think that's very dangerous. That just doesn't go for Qadianis. I would say this also goes for Aga Khanis as well. And I also would say even goes for people who are part of the Nation of Islam, and any person who doesn't believe that the Prophet ﷺ is the last prophet and messenger, or doesn't believe in his Sharia, or believes that God came in the person of a man that walked around and got thrown in jail or whatever. Like, these people aren't from Ahlul Qibla, and I don't think they should be given platforms in national Islamic conferences, whether they look like us or not, whether they're Desi or black. That shouldn't matter, in my opinion. The second thing, you're talking about Craig Considine. He nothing but the new flavor of the month, because we saw this with John Esposito, we saw it with Karen Armstrong. He just the latest white person who's come out and getting celebrated by Muslims as someone who's seen to have Islamophilia, but it's not just a perennialist, but has openly said things, speaking as well as in tweets and writing that distorts the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I forgot the organization, but I even saw it's in your country, in the UK. This guy was invited to speak at a Mawlid. Like what does he have to? How in the world can someone who does not believe in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam be invited to a Maulud Nabawi program? Like what? That's even new, because I don't even think that Karen Armstrong or John Esposito were ever invited to Maulid. Like, good God, like what's going on with us as Muslims? Excuse me, no, it wasn't in the UK. Excuse me, astaghfirullah. It was here in the States. Yeah, I know you're breathing heavy. I mean, you're breathing a sigh of relief. No, it wasn't in the States, but you could look it up. But a community invited this guy. Came across a little over a week ago. They invited this guy to speak at a Maulid. So that definitely should never be the case, right? I mean, what's going to be next? Are we going to be inviting him to come and give a muhadara when the masajid open back up for after COVID, or invite him to give khutbah? Like what's next?
That's sort of really. Oh, you know, when I'm very sort of UK based, so I've met American Muslims before, and they, I need to be very careful what I say on this one, but they strike me as a very strange breed, and they were very amazing people. I met Sheikh Hamza Maqbouz, one of my teachers, and he's an amazing Muslim, and if he was what American Muslims were, then we would have no problems. But I met America, so when you said a British Mawlid, I was like, no, now we're the guys that everybody's going to be playing.
Yeah, please pardon me about that, but you can go online and Google it, and you will see on YouTube, you can see this guy just spoke at a Maulid in this Rabiul Awwal this year.
Subhanallah. That's just like, that's why Sufis get a bad name. I mean, really. But and something that was mentioned there, I think will tie into something. And Ustad Mobeen, I mean, I love everything you write, and I try to read everything you write. And you've written from the Muslim Matters. You write consistently for them, and your articles can be found there. You wrote an article on Scott Kugel, which is an amazing article. I used it as part of a Quranic studies class I teach, just to show the problems of liberal tafsir. And I guess I love your work on the demography. And you write primarily, or you discuss America primarily, in terms of demographic shifts that have taken place. And I think demography sort of very much links in there was a big talk of demography generally in America with what happened in the recent election, where suddenly minority voters, seemingly really put off by communists. I mean, Trump kept saying communists, and the Cubans were like, we don't like them communists, so we're not going to vote for a communist because we know what happens in Cuba. And so suddenly the minorities rallied back, and Sheikh Imam Dawood spoke about the male vote within black communities that rallied against the woke agenda. I think I want to go more specifically to Muslim demographics in America, and I understand there's what happens in America to an extent. We have this understanding here, at least, that what happens in America eventually makes its way over the Atlantic and makes its way to our shores, because now the tide has shifted. We used to rule America once, but that was a very long time ago, and things are a bit different now. That America, at least ideologically, rules the Anglospheric world. In terms of the Muslim demographics in America, primarily university students, and I hear you talk a lot of the times about university students you've met, and university students generally in America. Like some people like Jonathan Haidt have spoken about the coddling of the American mind, that university students now don't have any, you posted about this recently, sorry, and I'm going on here, but you posted, about the idea that they don't have grounded ideas anymore. They're full of platitudes and just sentiments that don't really mean anything. They've become very triggered suddenly. They need all these safe spaces to keep them, because any idea that might not agree with them will cause them to have palpitations and boils to pop out or something of that sort. So I just want to come across now to demographic shifts that are happening in America. I mean, I guess we could talk about the minority shift that happened, the working class rallying against wokeism, firstly. And then what are you seeing on the ground within the millennials and the generations to come, the TikTok generation and the Snapchat generation, and God knows what social media app's going to be out in the next 2-3 years?
Yeah, that's a big question. I wrote an article on this called On Openness. It was on my own blog, where I talked about just the confluence of factors that I see coming together and really producing circumstances that are very difficult for young people. What I think you have happening is a number of things. I think you have a loosening of boundaries, right? And if you think about the world today, you have a collapse of real lived and embodied spaces. And so the average college student today probably has fewer friends than someone like I had in college, because most of their life is spent online, right? You can have like hundreds of friends online, but not really people who care for you as a person. When you talk about suhba and ukhuwa, I mean, I still remember the days when I was in the MSA, late nights hanging out, iftars, and just the sort of bonds that people are able to build in close company with one another.
MSA is American for ISOC.
Muslim Students Association. Yeah, Muslim Students Association, right? Just sort of the social network of brothers who can build bonds with one another in a shared solidarity of faith. You don't really have that today, right? You have a lot of people that are just sort of participating in life on campus independently and are really just trying to find their way. And it's a minefield for them. It really is a minefield for them, because very quickly they can find themselves ostracized or criticized and condemned, which is why they're searching out safe spaces, places where they feel like they can at least talk. But even those safe spaces are increasingly unsafe spaces to speak in. You also have the collapse of sort of morals and ethics that used to guide how Muslims behaved with one another, right? And so, when I was growing up, there was still some sense of, Muslim men and women, they interact with each other with a certain set of values and perspectives, right? That we have haya with one another as believers, and we care for one another, right? We understood the boundaries of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when it comes to khadma.
Just on a side note there, just to come in very quickly, when you're speaking now, because I'm at university at the moment, and my younger brother, I don't know, he wrote an article recently about why he left the Labour Party, and I saw you posted. That's my younger brother, so he's in the university at the moment, and I've had conversations with him. What you're describing sounds like you're talking about the practicing Muslims at university, not the people who are, because even back in the 80s, there were Muslims who were doing all sorts, but they weren't the practicing Muslims. Are you talking right now, what you're describing is the movement within the practicing Muslim sphere?
No, I think it's practicing Muslims, or just anyone who has a Muslim identity, period, right? In the sense that like the social media, for instance, is just a different world to be a part of. It's a different world to be a part of. And what it does is it regularly exposes you to a life of gossip and rumors. It regularly exposes you into a vicarious world of peeking into what other people are doing. It destabilizes the type of immediate relationships that can be built with people who are in your surroundings. So your families are less strong. And many young people today don't have the same relationship or the type of relationship that they should with their parents and their siblings and others, right? You have just all of these factors that are coming together. And I mentioned men and women as just one other area where, like today, you can go on an app like Tinder and find a girl to hang out with or potentially even sleep with, but like it's become so much more difficult to get married, right? It's much more difficult for a young person today to get married, because people who are serious at young ages and want to commit to a life of responsibility and the building of a family are far fewer in number. So when you talk about everything that comes together for a young person on campus, there's just all these factors that contribute to this feeling of just being a demoralized and marginalized and a confused person. Very, very confused. And I think that, we do them a disservice by coming in there and, to your point, sort of coddling that intuition or those sensibilities, instead of looking at them and saying, it is time for you to stand up and live as a person who confidently embodies your faith, right? Man kana yuridu al-izza falillahi al-izzatu jami'a. Whoever wants honor, then Allah is the source of that honor. And it is by living that life of honor in front of Allah that a person can re-establish and rediscover a life of family, can build strong ties of suhba and ukhuwa, and we need spaces where that exists. They need to witness them. Young people need to see a life of faith lived, and they need to see how warm and strong and just life fulfilling that can be, right? In terms of the answers it can provide to the big questions in this world. and what worship can do for a person, right? I think there's such an opportunity for young people to experience that today, but they're not finding places where those things can actually be experienced. And more young people are living online, right? More and more young people are just, have been completely indoctrinated and socialized by liberal progressive norms. And I think as a result of that, suffering a lot of anxieties, and we have to be willing to push back against the things that are hurting them as individuals, objectively recognizing that this is a path to misery that is being pursued, and that what we want to call them to is hayatan tayyiba, right? A pure life, right? Like that's Allah says, right? إِذَا دَعَاكُمْ لِمَا يُحْيِيكُمْ, right? Follow Allah and His Messenger when they call you to a life, to a path that gives you life, right? This gives you life, right? And I say that in general because I think that if we're just trying to observe the spiritual crisis that we have right now, is perhaps the biggest crisis that we have in the West. It is a spirit that is blackened and corrupted, right? And we have to, the soul of our community, the spirit of the community is not going to be resolved simply through fighting in the culture wars. It is going to be resolved by standing up as moral individuals and dealing with the consequences of that and speaking to the life of Islam, right? And calling people to that path. And Allah knows best.
I hope you don't mind, Imam Dawood, if I stay on Ustad Mobeen just for one more question. I just want to ask, one of the things that I've seen, I mean, I heard Mufti Menk quote, and that's when I knew this had permeated the Muslim mainstream, is the famous figure of the 23% Muslims, born Muslims in America are no longer Muslim. This is a Pew Study research, and I know you're very sort of in tune with demographic studies in America. And I'll be honest, for shock value, I rock this out whenever we're at like a talk or something. I'll be like, well, in America, this is what's going on, and we need to do this and that. And it really sort of sets people on edge, and they suddenly have this crisis. I mean, are things in America really as bad as we think they are? Also, based on that, I mean, there's this idea that the secularization thesis, that everybody was going to become atheist as we got more and more developed, which doesn't seem to be happening. In COVID, people are questioning their faith more and more. People traditionally in plagues and things would turn more inward, go to the masajid, which we have seen to an extent happen as well. But at the same time, we've seen it actually fast-track the process that was already underway. I mean, are things really as bad as people make out, or is there redemption?
Yeah, so, I'll say a couple of things. I think that in sort of the 90s, people were like, oh, the secularization thesis has been decisively proven wrong. I think perhaps they made that conclusion a little too early, right? I think secularization does have an impact, right, on a society. And over time, it becomes very difficult to uphold faith in a society that loses its commitment to core fundamental issues, first principles, right? And so, like we see this today, I mean, you have a society that can't figure out what it means to be a man or a woman anymore, right? I mean, if you can't agree on that, how are you going to agree on almost anything, right? Like, how can you construct a society that has some shared moral ground when you can't agree on that question? Like, it doesn't get much easier than that question, and yet it is one of those complex questions that we're dealing with today, right? In terms of social shifts, I mean, it's happening, right? And to a large extent, it's probably going to continue happening. We have to realize that there are really, really strong factors that are working against us today, right? And a young person today is growing up being exposed to a certain brand of media and television and everything else, and they're being socialized into a particular cultural setting. And all of those things militate against traditional societies and traditional Islam, right? And so if I'm just growing up as like a consumer in this society, there becomes a point where even if I have some knowledge of Islam, I probably ask myself, how much do I want to keep fighting against myself? And why can't I just be like anyone else? Why can't I just be a normal, everyday person, right? Why do I have to be this sort of strange individual who, like, everything's haram, right? Like, that's what they say. Like, why can't I just be like everyone else? That is the fundamental and underlying anxiety that we're always going to have to deal with in a society that is not of our own making as Muslims, and that we are simply trying to struggle to continue and transmit our faith generationally. Having said that, there's things that we can do locally, certainly individually and within the family context, and those are efforts that we should make and take much more seriously than we do, recognizing that the national stuff to a large extent is outside of our conscious control, right? And those are shifts that will continue to happen. But I mean, that we really have to turn into sort of an establishment of strong families, strong communities, strong faith-based circles and spaces where we're living our deen, right? And I think that we can cultivate that and have countercultural spaces. And we have to be engaged in the broader dialogue, because that broader dialogue is not going to leave us alone, right? The more we sit back, the more they're going to impose more and more laws on us that criminalizes or prohibits our ability to live as faith-based actors. But, you know, we cannot sort of psychologically and emotionally completely have our minds dominated by national politics the way we do today. We just can't, because those spaces are, as I've mentioned, they're theologizing spaces today. They are theologizing spaces. They're indoctrinating spaces. They are spaces in which people will come to find themselves in a particular and embody a particular political identity that will loom and overwhelm everything else in its path. And so, you know, we have to get back to a really strong commitment of faith. But, you know, yeah, I mean, the social trends are what they are, and they're probably going to continue. It happened to Christians, happened to Jews. We, you know, many Muslims from overseas came here later, right? We're sort of a younger community, and so it's happening to us. And the least we can do is try to push back and offer our youth a strong articulation of our faith to show them that this is the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
I mean, I'm cognizant of the time. We've been running for about 2 hours, 15 minutes. I recognize that we've got a bit more time, but I am going to come to closing remarks soon. On that question again, though, Imam Dawood, I guess this election, in terms of the results that came out, it was meant to be, this was the election that was going to show this is America's verdict on Trump. I mean, Biden was saying, I can't remember which, I think it was the last debate, there wasn't a second debate, but the one where he kept saying, you know, the moral decency of the American people is on that ballot. This is what's going to decide. And it seems the moral decency of the American people, at least the minority population, said, we do not want our children to become transgenders. We don't want to be part of the work brigade. We reject this. And I guess that one of the comments did come in on that. I mean, and you mentioned the black community specifically, the Muslim minority population is starting to imbibe more and more progressive values. In terms of the working class general American population, why was there a strong repudiation of progressive values? And and you mentioned a gender divide, and I think that would be something interesting to come in on as well.
Well, I think there's a number of factors regarding the increased support, not only the amount of votes in general for President Trump in this election, but even a growing amount of votes specifically amongst the Native American community, Latino community, and the African American community as well. So there's different things or factors at play. Some of it could be chalked up as self-centered and purely individualistic in nature, meaning President Biden guaranteed he's going to undo the Trump tax cuts. People who make a certain amount of money, will end up getting taxed a lot more. So there's a popular rapper in America named 50 Cent, and he came straight out and said, I'm voting for Trump because Biden's going to hurt my pocket.
Because I want to keep my 50 cents.
Yeah, and when we had the caucus of the Pakistani Americans for Trump, which there's overlap between the Muslim Americans for Trump. We see people from a particular socioeconomic level who, at the end of the day, believe that in the concept of free markets, but underneath that is that they would be taxed more and lose more money. So that's one consideration. Then you have the issue of people who are non-white who felt that Trump was clearly saying things advantageous to their white nationalist agenda, their white nationalist feelings. They feel like they're losing their country. Hence, Make America Great Again wasn't even really a dog whistle. And some of the statements he made about, like in Charlottesville, there's good people on both sides, where you literally have white supremacists on one side. When he tells the Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. And some of the other statements he's made, I look at it that Trump, in a sense, pulled off the Band-Aid off of America so that the broader public could see the scab of what America really is. And the reality is we have millions of people in America who are white supremacists, and they never left. They were pushed underground by what's the term, so-called political correctness. And Trump basically pulled that Band-Aid off, where people say, you know what, I don't need to be politically correct anymore. Hence, the former Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan explicitly talked about how Trump was speaking his language. David Duke and Steve Bannon, who's a white nationalist, who even takes his mischief from America and goes into Europe and spreads his message. Then there's a third group of people, I think, who are like, look, there's an agenda on the left that's trying to fundamentally change what America is. And even though America isn't great, and I don't like certain things about America, that they don't like the vision that the far progressive left is putting forward, where there are no limits for abortions, not even past first trimester, but second and third trimester. The push to legalize prostitution, not only the move of gender equity, which I don't have a problem with, but even the move to eliminate gender completely, right? As we mentioned with the non-binary, people should have the right to completely eliminate gender altogether and gender differences. I experienced this. I was last year when I spoke at a conference at Cambridge University, and I noticed at the university that the bathrooms had like anyone could use any bathroom in the university. That was shocking, right? And this is a shocking prospect for many people in America. They don't want unisex public bathrooms or anyone just to walk in or to locker rooms, right? So these are some of the real concerns that people have. There's others. The state of Oregon just did something unprecedented, which is a very far left state. They decriminalized narcotics, which means that people in the state of Oregon, starting in 2021, will be able to go on the streets and get heroin and cocaine and LSD. This is shocking, right, to people. People don't want the park around the corner from their home where people are openly dealing heroin and cocaine and the police won't come to intervene. People don't want that. People don't want that. So that's part of the issue here. Why I believe also a certain group of Americans who think that Trump is a miscreant. They think he's self-centered and a narcissist, and he's a liar, and maybe even a rapist, right? But when it comes to some of these traditional social ideas that he doesn't exemplify or embody at all, but that he is willing to protect these values. And I think this is a third reason, a big reason, again, why I know certain Muslims who voted for Trump specifically, because they don't want, especially talking about the Black community, how in very poor areas, how drug trafficking has ravaged communities, right? Open drug trafficking and the level of violence that comes around with that. People don't want legalized prostitution and legalized selling of crack in their neighborhoods, right? And Trump, so they voted for Trump. You're on mute, CD.
Yeah. Mute.
Okay, my bad. Sorry about that. No, because this idea of, I guess, Trump as a reflection. Trump is the mirror that America saw its own reflection in, and then it didn't really like what it saw. And that's become, and also you had people within the left who were like, Trump's a good thing because he'll galvanize the forces of good, quote unquote, against him, which actually they spend more time fighting with each other than doing anything. I realized I really wanted to talk about the right-wing Muslims because there's a whole bunch of guys who really sort of, I don't know how you go into, but there's like a very sort of right-wing Muslim movement that started where they're very pro-Trump, they're very sort of on certain ideas of gender, they're very sort of problematic, but they claim to be people of Futuwah and other such things. But we don't have time. So instead, I'm going to come to the easiest part of all discussions, which is solutions, because that's, you know, that's going to be so simple. That will probably take about 5 minutes and we'll be done. And you guys will tell us how to fix the world, inshallah, in that time. But I mean, there's this idea that when this election happened and there was the vote count thing, suddenly one of the things Americans kept saying is, oh, the Iranians are laughing at us. That look, America is collapsing. America is finished. This is the end. Oh, the American empire collapses around us. And I guess to an extent, the death, well, we had Dr. Shadi on a while back, and he spoke about we should not wish for the destruction of the lands we live in, because with their destruction is our destruction. And I guess this is where I want to come to as we come to a close. In terms of when Trump comes in, when the right wing suddenly takes charge, we've got a lot of populist movements taking charge in Europe. Alhamdulillah, the Tory party in the UK isn't as bad as people like to make out. I know I'm going to get a lot of people telling me off for saying that afterwards, but I really think in terms of right wing movements, Britain has always been pretty cautious. And suddenly claims come out, we got to make the hijrah, Turkey, Istanbul, get all the liras in, go there as quickly as you can. Malaysia, I heard good things about Morocco. Jordan's very expensive, but we need to do what we need to do and we need to go. And this is, now that we're facing the situations we're facing, Allah knows best what's going to happen next. And we pray for goodness and afiyah and whatever Allah decrees for us. What should Muslims be doing in the non-Muslim lands they live in as minorities? And is hijrah the answer? I mean, is it time to leave, or do we stand and fight? I mean, so I want to start Mubin to start off on this one, because you talked a lot about the Benedictine option. I think maybe I pronounced that correctly. I'm not sure, but the way pardon?
The Benedict option. The Benedict option.
The Benedict option. So is it Saint Benedict, or this idea that you become sort of enclosed communities, you start taking care of your own, you start to, like that. People speak about the idea of we have to become the people of Surah Al-Kahf. It's time to get in the caves and face, and hide away and just hunker down until it all blows over. Then we'll come out at the end, and in 300 years' time, American president will be a Muslim, like the way it was in Surah Kahf or whatever. So how do we see things progressing, and what is our place in all of this?
Yeah, so I'll mention a couple of things. I think Rod Dreher's specific sort of Benedict option, I think that's actually a bit more modest than people sort of seem to suggest. I think people who haven't read it seem to think that it's proposing a very insular retreat from society. In some ways it is, some ways it isn't. That's sort of a longer discussion. I think to the more substantive point of should Muslims sort of turn insular and retreat from the public square, I don't think that's really an option. And I've said that part of the reason behind that is because no one's going to leave you alone anymore. You're just not going to be left alone, right? Even if you're sort of by yourself, trying to handle yourself as a community, they're going to consistently impinge on your ability to function independently with your own sense of moral commitment and values. And that's becoming more and more difficult. And the extent to which we care even about our own ability to live as Muslims, we're going to have to raise our voices on those types of issues which are unpopular, but issues where we at least want people to understand that we have a shared concern. And this is a shared concern that's not exclusively ours, but it's others as well. And we want to see that respected, right? We want to see that respected. And that exists in sort of our faith-based programs, as well as our civil rights and other spaces, right? Like we need organizations, we need people like Imam Dawood, right? To come out and defend Muslims against, the government when it is violating our civil rights and civil liberties. And we need people like him also to come out. And mashallah, he does so when our faith isn't being respected, right? And our values aren't being respected and our beliefs aren't being respected. And so we have to have some level of engagement there, because then what we've done is we've basically assumed a posture of defeat, which defeat may be in the cards as it is, but you can't start from that platform, right? You at least have to try to do something for yourself. and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give you assistance in that program. I think, as I've said before, I think sort of our psychological investment should be more heavily focused towards things that are local to us and things that we can affect more directly. And so I'll give an example. I think if Muslims care about racial justice, it is important, for instance, to advocate for things like criminal justice reform or police reform and things like that. But there are things that they can do in their own communities. There are things that they can, look, I'm 25 minutes from Baltimore. I don't have to go very far to see communities and spaces that are extremely depressed. And I can find Muslims and masajid there that are struggling to so much as pay their utility bills, where you have a number of poor people within these communities. And that's something I can do. I can get in my car, drive 25 minutes, visit my brothers and sisters and say, Wallahi, I'm going to help you guys. And I'm going to figure out what can I do? Because we are an ummah, right? You know, this is you are my brothers. What can I do to help here? And I'll figure something out. Because, you know, we're Muslims, and as Muslims, we can always find something with brothers and sisters with shared common grounds where we have a set of commitments. And that's something plenty of Muslims can do. Muslims reside in urban centers. You don't have to go that far. You don't have to spend your whole day at a Black Lives Matter rally. You can just go to the masjid, go find the communities that you see struggling and say, well, I'm going to help out and try to help my brothers and sisters here, whether it's my time, effort, energies, raising funds, doing something to directly impact, influence, and support Muslims, right? And help my brother. I can make that happen and help others. It doesn't just have to be Muslim. I can help other poor people too. Those are communities that many Muslims aren't very far from, right? You don't have to drive more than an hour to see these places. And yet you're investing all of your sort of emotional and psychological energy into broad national programs that have agendas that contradict your faith and that move it, and that you have very little control over, right? And so you want to be part of conversations where, okay, like we do want to see criminal justice reform, we do want to see police reform, but we also want to be people who are living out those commitments if we really care about them, right? And I think that that's the type of effort and activity that Muslims haven't taken up very seriously to date. There are efforts here and there, they're a minority, and there's so much space that remains available for us and work that we can do to show people that it's not just rhetoric, right? It's not just virtue signaling. It's actually something that we believe in and care about. And here's what it is, right? And we do it liwajhillah, right? That's why we do it, right? La nuridu minkum jaza'an wa la shukura. We're not looking for anything. We're just doing it for that reason. I think that is an honorable approach to live with and a real honorable platform to have for Muslims. Allah knows better.
Imam Dawood, I mean, I'm going to turn the question straight to you. In terms of solution, is it time to leave Colorado and go to Kuala Lumpur, or do we stick around? And I think your response will be, and I appreciate Ustad Mubin immensely, but the fact is that you work very hard on the ground in terms of a lot of the national efforts, especially in the local area that you live in. You're part of many, you're part of the Manor and other organizations I probably have never even heard of, that you're doing immense work helping the Muslims in America. And so for Muslims living in the West, is it what are things that they should be doing? Is it time now to look inwards, introspection, just focus on your own family, go to the hadith of the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, get your sheep, go to the nearest mountain that you can find, hide away, break your swords, all those famous hadith that people and Sahaba saw realities that, like Sayyidina Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, in the time when Sahaba was still alive, thought that this is the fitna and it's time to go into hiding. We're now 1,300 years later, and we still, how do we now react to the situation that we see ourselves in, and what are the product, and especially for people living in the UK, maybe even, what advice would you give to them in terms of helping our brothers and sisters in America, or even helping themselves in Anglospheric communities?
Okay, as far as hijra, and I want to be clear about that, as far as literal hijra outside of the United States of America, my opinion is, as long as our wajibat are legally protected and we can practice those in our own free volition in America, I don't think that it's a must for us to leave. In saying that, I know of some African Americans who are Muslims who have left, and I know 3 right now who are making plans to leave next month to migrate to Senegal, somewhere in the Gambia right now, and simply because it's not as much as an issue of faith practice, but really just tired of dealing with how this country historically and continues to marginalize and look at Black people. So it's more of an issue of just wanting some room to breathe and to be able to like raise one's children in an environment where they don't feel like they are being marginalized simply because of skin color, right? So I do know of people like that. I think that there should be, I agree with Ustad Mubin, there needs to be a level of healthy of healthy removing ourselves somewhat from the society, but I don't think that we can completely remove ourselves. You know, one of my friends, he believes that there's a third option, which I'm not sure of the feasibility. Number one, because I don't think many Muslims would buy into it, because it would cause a lot of struggle, and we unfortunately have become a people of ease and middle class comfort, a large amount of us. But one of my friends who's a sheikh, so there's a third option of voluntary seclusion, kind of like maroon communities, or kind of like what the Gullah Geechee people did, where they left the mainland of Georgia, left the mainland of South Carolina, and went off to islands. But instead of going to an island, basically going to areas that are basically uninhabited or not inhabited by many people, and establishing Muslim communities like how the Amish people have done in America, which is a conservative religious group, people who immigrated from Denmark. That I mean, they still ride horses and don't have TVs, not to that extreme, but have segregated themselves, where they do homeschooling and they have their churches there, and their only contact with the broader society is only through trade and transaction. Right? I don't necessarily think that's the way. Right?
Is that like the Islamberg model? Maybe?
Kind of like Islamberg model. We also have something like this in Michigan. There's more than one Islamberg. There's a number of, this has been tried already. And in my state, in Michigan, there's a group that is affiliated with the same sheikh as the people in Islamberg, Sheikh Jilani. So this is I don't think that a large percentage of American Muslims would buy into that. So we have to have a level of practicality. What I will say is that our emphasis has to be on the youth, of not necessarily looking at this generation of people who already have their socio-political views molded so much, but the younger people. And we talked about this before, and we started to develop something like this here in Detroit, but I think there needs to be regional Fatua guilds. We need something for the Fityan, and there could be something separate for the young girls, but especially with the emasculation of males in America, the purposeful engineered emasculation of males and masculine identity. I think that we need Fatua guilds in all regions, to from a level of character, akhlaq, but also to put that healthy, manly confidence. Because we have too many cowards in our community here in America. A lot of the position that American Muslims take is not because of like something that is like, I'll use this term again, dururi. It's not absolute necessity. It's not like Ammar ibn Yasir when he's about to get killed after seeing his mother and father getting killed. It's not like that. It has to do with the lack of cowardice, of being afraid that, oh, such and such may not like me. You know what I mean? It's punk. It's a punk mentality, right? So we really need the Fatua guilds to get our brothers to grow up to have backbone, because we have a lot of punks walking around, just to be quite frank. So we have to deal with that.
SubhanAllah. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Alhamdulillah. That's incredible. I just, as we come to a close now, I mean, we've had a brilliant discussion, and I really enjoyed it, alhamdulillah, and I'm hoping the viewers did too. And I know that there's people planning to watch this afterwards who couldn't get on, and we pray that Allah Jalla wa'ala makes it a means of benefit for every single person that does watch it. I was going to go to closing remarks, but I feel like whatever you guys just said were your closing remarks. I don't see how we can actually go in. I mean, if there's anything either of you wants to add before we come to a close, just let me. Anything anybody wants to say before we close?
I will say, just in conclusion, if you're going to be involved in activism and politics, get yourself a spiritual mentor or a murshid. Do not keep suhbah or company with the weak-hearted and the faint. Stay in company with people who are confident in themselves and their Muslim identity as far as Islam, Iman, and Ihsan. And if more of us commit to that, those two basic things, then I think that will do something in time to shift where we've unfortunately gotten to now, whereas Ustad Mubin says many of us have just simply resigned ourselves from going down the lizard hole.
Subhanallah, incredible advice. May Allah give us the tawfiq to act upon all the goodness that has been shared, and anything that we've said that was not becoming of us as Muslims. We ask that Allah Jalla wa'ala forgives us for any shortcomings. I ask both of my guests to forgive me for any of my shortcomings, for anything I may have said that may have been out of line. I ask you to forgive me. Anything that I've said that may have offended you, please do forgive me. I just like to let people know that we have continuing live streams happening here at the Karima Foundation. Tomorrow is our last day of Moments with the Messenger, the commemoration of the Prophet ﷺ series that we've had throughout the month of Rabiul Awwal. Everybody is requested to tune in and watch that. I think that will be Maulana Thaman who will be finishing off the series that we've covered. And we've had a lot of podcasts and live streams that we've done. Feel free to check those out. To both of my guests, I extend heartfelt gratitude. I'm very grateful for both of you giving us time. Imam Dawood once again taking out time to join us on Ustad Mubin for the first time, and hopefully not for the last time. We hope to have you on again, maybe on your own, to do a full podcast with us, inshaAllah, like we did with Ustad Dawood, Imam Dawood. And even more importantly, I mean, we're in lockdown at the moment. So in England, national lockdown. In the UK, we'll be out of it, inshaAllah, in December. Apparently a vaccine has been found, and it seems, we hope that the rumors of the Islam of the two doctors who found the vaccine is true, that these are Muslims. And I think they are, because there is a report that they received a prize for Islamic science discoveries in Iran or something. So there seems to be a good indication that they are Muslims. We pray that Allah rewards them and helps them for their discovery, but that might be coming out. So we may even have an opportunity to host you at some point. I don't know if you guys, I don't know, Sheikh Dawood was obviously in the UK last year when he came to Cambridge, went to the big universities, but inshallah he'll come and join us out in our small community centre in High Wycombe as well. And Ustad Mubin, I don't know if you come to the UK often, but if you do, inshallah, we will be more than willing to host you for an event, and then you can meet our community and the people of this small town of High Wycombe that is becoming very infamous in the Islamic social media sphere. But once again, Jazakallah for your time, Jazakallah for joining us, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam.
Islam wa barakatuh.